What's the most embarrassing thing you did as a kid that you think about to this day? Way back in high school, does that count? We were in creative writing class. Teacher liked to expand our horizons and whatnot, so we had a segment on plays and improv. He split us up into groups of 4, and we had like 10 meters, probably less, to come up with the basic outline of a story involving 2 known heroes and villains. Part of the discovery, and it wouldn't be funny to her, we grabbed the batteries and returned to our dog toy. Back then, I was a very insecure, self-conscious shy kid, but I was aware of it and trying to overcome it, and all. By sheer chance, I got paired with the 3 weirdest kids in class. One guy, we'll call him Tom, who was this tall lanky guy who was just loud, socially unaware, and impulsive. There was, who we'll call Ashley, a short, stout, spray-tanned girl with much the same personality quirks as Tom. And finally, there was Nativa, a very quiet girl I knew from elementary school. So I do my best to try to push our team to think of something. Tom decides he'll be Superman. Ashley and Nativa agree that some rando characters from Mean Girls will do. And I can't think of diddly squat, so I pick Darth Vader. We decide to have Superman and Vader fight, while the 2 others commentate. Cheer? I don't know. So I try kind of pushing them to come up, so we start. My worst nightmares come true. Every other group has these detailed stories complete with conclusions, dialogue, twists. There was even an entire trial against none other than Darth Vader. Even my character was already taken. We get up there and announce our characters. I'm just kind of holding a calculator case to my I wasn't expecting it, and Tom is a tall dude, so I topple over and frantically try to stay in character. By screeching "I am your father," I knocked some desks to the side and fell to the ground. All the while, Ashley and Nativa are just standing there, never doing or saying anything. My teacher ends the fiasco with, "We have a lot of work to do." I think I was about that age when I visited another country with a friend's family, but I hadn't wet the bed in years and had no idea how one would go about rectifying that situation. It freaking happened twice. My friend's grandparents were separated and lived a few houses down from each other, so we stayed with both of them over the week we were there. The first time I think I had some brilliant plan to hide it, but honestly my memory is fuzzy, and I think I just balled up the sheet and stuffed it in a box in a closet. JPG. The second time was at the other grandparents' house. I had a dream that I was laying in an empty bathtub when I realized, in the dream, that I needed to pee. I figured, hey, I'm in a bathtub anyway, what the hell? I wasn't even done peeing when the wetness woke me up. I got up to change my pants and find something to strategically cover the spot so I could sleep the rest of the night, but my friend's mom was still awake and I had to come clean. Now I get a cringe thinking about someone inevitably finding my shame ball in the closet and her family discussing the culprit, only to discover that they'd accidentally invited a perpetrator into their homes. My friend told me that saying "give me a blue job" meant "tell me a joke," or something innocent like that. I found my 8-year-old self saying it out loud to 4 of my sister's friends. There was silence. There were no blue jobs. Unsettling to this day. Another time this guy pulled a chair from under me just as I was about to sit, and I landed on the floor. This was at a dinner somewhere by the pool, and I was probably 12. To avenge this, I saw him standing next to the pool and thought I'd push him inside the pool. I went for it except he moved, and I lost my footing, resulting in me in the water wearing a suit. I was very mad at myself. I once got slapped by a freaking monkey while I was trying to retrieve a ball that was under the tree that he was sitting on next to his food plate. I'll tell you this, monkeys have a lot of strength, and they are very quick. I was once texting a friend saying how annoyed I was at Mike. I sent the whole text to Mike, who was sitting next to me. I was wearing pants that were too loose on the waist for me, and I fell flashing a great number of people. Need I go on? Edit. Let's do some more. This isn't childhood, but I once took a customer out for dinner. We were joined by a friend of the customer who clearly had a drinking problem. He ended up having me drink a little too much, and I ended up blacking out. When I came to, the first thing I did was puke all over the table and the customer's friend. The customer took a napkin and cleaned my face. The next day in the office, the friend who I also puked on showed up wearing the same shirt. The customer and I exchanged this terrible look and turns out he was too wasted to remember anything. But we reminded him to ruin his day. I was 19 at the time. Just recently a doctor put his hand forward to check my pulse, and I offered my hand in handshake. My friend's dad wanted this box moved, but he said it was too heavy and asked our help. I said I can do it solo. As soon as I got it off the ground, it fell through, breaking my pinky in the process. The box had china in it which was promptly damaged too. I earned no points that day and broke the first bone in my life. When I first started driving, I saw this girl in the car next to me, and my god, she was beautiful. We were approaching a light, so we were slowing down, and to my amazement she turned and smiled at me. As I was still smiling back, I was abruptly stopped by the power of a parked truck. My hood went right under as it grazed, eventually stopping more than halfway through. Thank frick it did. The truck had no damage whatsoever, and as I stepped out, he gave me the finger and left. The girl was gone too. Her smile cost a lot. Edit 3.0. I'm grateful that I was able to make so many of you laugh today. Embarrassing though they may be, I'm always happy to make others laugh with these stories. When I was probably about 6 or 7, we went to visit my mum's best friend. Her friend had kids slightly older than me and my sister. Her friend's daughter was showing signs of having an eating disorders at a scarily young age, and I had overheard my mum talk about this with my dad. She was angry at her friend for not noticing how much her own daughter was eating, how she would open the fridge and grab handfuls of anything she could find 5 minutes before dinner. A conversation that was in private and meant no harm, I overheard. So we are up staying at their house, and this girl annoys me. Can't remember what she did, but I had issues with my anger back then, so it was probably quite tame, but I was mad. I turn and tell at her, calling her all sorts of names, mainly calling her fat. She runs off, and both my mum and her friend come over to tell me off. My mum grabs my wrist and very sternly tells me to apologize and that I should call her fat. I, a stupid angry 7-year-old, then say, "But you call her fat all the time. You even said it in the car on our way here." My mum freezes. Her friend has a look of shock on her face. All I remember is her asking my mum, "Did you really say that?" and them walking off, leaving me to realize what I had just done. The thought of this so embarrassing moment makes me cringe super hard. She's still friends with her, and they sometimes bring the story up if they want me to die inside. When I was in 11th grade, I became really close with a girl on my lacrosse team. Since her parents were divorced, she usually spent the night at my house once a weekend. One time, she finally invited me over to her mom's house, where her younger brother and sister were also staying that weekend. She had just given me the tour of the house and left to go to the bathroom while I changed to swim. To this day I think it's hilarious to scare people, so naturally I hid in her closet waiting for her to come back. Except it wasn't her closet. It wasn't her room at all. I actually was hiding in her younger sister's closet. All the bedrooms in the house were generic like guest bedrooms, since the kids usually stayed with their dad. I just assumed my friend left me alone in her room. When I heard her come back from the bathroom, I waited 30 seconds and opened the double door closet with a loud boo. Her little sister screamed, started crying, and ran out of the room. I was mortified. I had to explain to my friend and her mom why I decided to hide in the closet. I still had to spend the rest of the night there, and I was never invited back. Fast forward 7 years and I'm a long-term substitute teacher for the district I went to. I've just finished graduate school, and I'm extremely nervous to be subbing, especially because you never know how the kids will act. I was taking attendance for the 12th grade class I was going to be teaching for the next few months when I saw the name of the sister on the roster. The whole 3 months I never mentioned the closet situation and I hoped she didn't remember it. On the last day of school, she asked me in front of the entire class, "Why were you hiding in my closet?" I wanted to die. Don't make me pick just one. High on the list. I was really lucky to have aunts and uncles who would always bring us gifts when we were kids. One year when I was 8 or 9 we had an aunt visit who had been estranged, but was now opening up to the family for visits. She came to see us for the first time in a long time, and while I was curious to see her again, I was downright excited for a new gift giver. Trouble was, no one told her about the family tradition. When the first day passed without getting anything, I figured she must be saving it for her goodbyes like grandma does, but as we got closer to her exit date the anxiety grew inside me as it dawned that maybe she had come empty-handed. This culminated at our last supper together, where after the adults discussed plans to get my aunt to the airport I broke down in racking sobs. At first the adults assumed I was sad to see my aunt go, but I was unable to keep the real reason to myself. I still remember the beet red faces of my parents as I implored them, tears streaming down my face, to drive us to the mall. That there was still time for her to get me something. I met up with that aunt recently, and she asked me if I remembered that. I told her it remains a constant source of shame. She said it was one of her fondest memories of me. There's many embarrassing things I've done, but the one that always haunts me every now and then is the grade 6 school talent show. We had a dance expert come to our elementary school to coach each class on a routine that each class would then present in one big show with our parents, teachers and the rest of the school watching. To add even more pressure, the entire show was going to be recorded so everyone could take a copy home as a keepsake. My specific class routine was a musical and instrumental number. Basically half the class did a weird interpretive dance with what looked like a face cloth that they'd throw and catch in the air a few times. Or you could stand off to the side and play a fake dollar store blow up musical instrument. Me, being prone to freaking up, decided to go the easier route, so I chose playing a fake blow up musical instrument. My job was simple. I stood off to the side with 3 other classmates. We pretended to play our instruments. Then midway through the routine we got a cue and the instrument players would have to walk to the middle of the stage, and we had a solo moment where we were in the spotlight and we'd pretend to be really getting into playing our fake instruments. Then we'd walk back to where we were and keep pretending to play off to the side. So you might be thinking, okay, all I have to do is pretend to play a shitty fake instrument, walk a few steps to center stage on cue, continue playing said fake instrument, then walk back. Easy. He couldn't possibly frick that up, right? Wrong. Show day comes, and it's our turn. We assume our positions on stage and I see the dark auditorium full of white noise, a bunch of excited parents, and the red light of the camera recording our show. Gulp. Okay Markham 6246, you got this. I'm playing my fake instrument with my 3 other classmates, and I'm getting really into it. Really selling this performance. Then suddenly I hear the cue. But was it the cue? It sounded kind of like it, but it could have also been someone from the audience making a similar noise. I turned to my instrument bandmates and said, was that it? Do we walk out to the middle? And they all nodded yes. Go. Okay, this is our moment. I walk out to the middle of the stage, strumming the frick out of this fake blow up guitar. Confident as ever. I get to the middle and where are my bandmates? Why are they still standing in the corner laughing at me while playing their instruments? Frick. Immediately I realized that wasn't the cue. I got mixed up. So I immediately ran back to the corner and casually kept playing my instrument, completely red in the face as my bandmates are dying of laughter next to me, and realizing I just fricked up and embarrassed myself in front of the entire school, our parents and teachers. But also this was being recorded. There's now recorded evidence of my frick up for everyone to take home and laugh at me at. I was mortified. In retrospect it probably wasn't that bad. The parents and teachers likely laughed and thought it was adorable. I mean, this is an elementary school talent show, so the bar isn't too high, but nevertheless I still think back to this and cringe at how I was front and center stage when I fricked up. That's my story. I lived in MA until I was about 4. Some of my earliest memories are of going to the gun shop with my dad. The proprietor was his close friend, and my dad was a hunter safety instructor. I was shooting handguns on outdoor ranges by the time I was 3. One afternoon, I was investigating the area behind the counter in the gun shop. Now, my dad was a drunk at the time. Whenever we went to the gun shop, the second stop was usually to the bar, and as such, His caretaking methods were lax, at best. So there's my dad and Mr. R, chatting away, and there's me, quietly prowling behind the counter, looking, but not touching. I came upon a doorbell button, and asked Mr. R, interrupting the conversation, why the doorbell was inside, not outside by the shop door. Mr. R kindly said that is not a doorbell, that is a silent alarm, that makes no noise in the store, but calls the police if someone ever came in here wanting to do bad things. So don't push it, because it's not an emergency, and we don't want to send the police a false alarm. No, don't push it. Well, I had already pushed it, of course. My dad and Mr. R were still chatting a few minutes later, when a police officer came in, and asked if everything was okay. My dad was embarrassed, and Mr. R explained that curiosity had gotten the better of a precocious youngster. I don't remember what happened after that. My dad was probably annoyed with me, but Mr. R was fine about it. In fact, more than 30 years and 2 states later, Mr. R came to my dad's funeral last winter, and I didn't realize he was the shop proprietor until he said, "You were so small the last time I saw you in the shop," and I put 2 and 2 together and said, "Oh. I pushed the button, didn't I?" And he laughed, and said, "Yes you did," with a hug and a kind smile. When I was a kid, my family and I took a vacation to Ocean City, New Jersey. It's a great family-friendly beach town with a boardwalk and lots of fun stuff for kids. That fun stuff includes several little shops on the boardwalk, where you can buy hermit crabs. It was great. All of their shells had different little paintings on them, and you'd buy your own little wire cage for them to climb on, and food, and a little sponge for them to drink out of, and little plastic trees and gravel, the whole 9 yards. So with the allowance money I'd been saving all year, I bought 2 little guys to bring back home. I was so excited. End of the week comes, and we get to the airport to fly home. I'm very concerned that they won't let me take my new pets through security. This is pre-9/11, so things aren't as stringent as they are now. So my concerned 7-year-old self runs up to the lady at security and shows her my pets. Then, I say, loudly enough for the entire security line to hear, in my high-pitched 7-year-old voice, "Excuse me, I have crabs." To which the nice lady at the front says, "Well, you better do something about that, honey." The entire line, including my own parents and 2 older siblings, is dying laughing. I have no idea why, and I'm embarrassed and confused. I start to cry, and my mom retrieves me. I didn't understand the context until much later. My mom still tells that story to every new girlfriend she meets. I ran full speed and leaped into a glass storm door. I was about 9 or 10 when my parents and I went to visit some family friends. It was my first time at their house, and as we walked up, I noticed the front door was open, and I could see everyone watching TV in the living room. On an odd impulse, I thought it might be funny to run in, jump through the doorway and land, yelling surprise. I sprinted ahead of my parents, jumped, and was met by some sort of force field that thwarted my forward motion, sending me into a backward somersault, and ended up face down on their front porch. Nothing broke on the door or my person. I ended up with a huge welt on my forehead and a funny story to tell. My friend, who we were going to visit, saw the whole thing from the inside. From her perspective, those 3 to 5 seconds went from "oh hey, standing urine is running," because he's so excited to see us, to "oh my god he's not slowing down, why is he jumping." This was almost 30 years ago, and, to this day, they keep a decoration hanging on that glass door just in case someone else attempts the same maneuver. To my knowledge I'm the only one. When I was around 9, my friend and I had a crush on this teenager we would see in the park. We got this idea that he would be impressed with us if we gave him a present and did a dance routine for him using the park as a stage. So we practiced a dance to a Steps song. They were really popular in the UK. I'm not sure what song without listening to the most popular ones on YouTube and torturing myself. We also collected things we thought were nice and wrapped them up using Christmas paper, mostly glittery notebooks and things that were our favorites. The presents made actually no sense because why would a teenage boy want a glittery notebook that's pre-owned? We didn't see him in the park except for in a huge group of teenagers that made us too nervous. So we got the idea of going to his house instead. My friend found out where he lived somehow, and we snuck out of the park to walk the 15 minutes to his house. Neither of us were allowed to leave the park and wander in this area. We started knocking on doors asking if anyone knew him. Eventually we found the right door and his mother opened the door. We told her we had a present for him, and his mother just stood there looking at us for ages. She asked us how we knew him, clearly thinking he's a pedo or something, and we said we loved him. She dismissively told us she would give it to him, and we should go home, and that's when my friend told her we had a dance prepared for him. She stared at us like we were total freaks, which we were. When we went into secondary school not that many years later, he was in the final years of school, so we had to see him every day. I doubt he even knew who we were, but I felt sick with embarrassment whenever I saw him. So I was at a friend's cabin for the weekend. The cabin belonged to her grandparents and we usually went out for a weekend or two in the summer. We stayed in a room with bunk beds and hung out in there most of the time. One night, we had been playing this really old board game we found under the bed but got bored, so somehow we decided to play Harry Potter instead. We took apart 2 croquet mallets and used just the sticks as wands. We were shouting spells at each other and waving them vigorously, and I found it utterly hilarious. Unfortunately, I really had to pee, and while I lunged wildly to hit my friend with an Expelliarmus, I peed myself. Even more unfortunately, I had forgotten my pajamas and had borrowed her grandmother's nightgown. And to top it off, we hadn't cleaned up the board game, so I had lunged 1 foot into the open board game box. So yes, I peed myself in front of my friend, in her grandmother's nightgown, waving a croquet mallet at her shouting Expelliarmus, and bust right into the board game box below. Aside from the fact that this was the most humiliating thing I had ever done in front of another person, I then made the mistake of hiding the evidence. We pushed the board game under the bed, and the next day I gave back the nightgown like nothing had happened. But every time I hung out with my friend for the next several years, she would smugly and subtly mention the incident in a way that made me think she would tell whoever else was in the room. My heart would start jackhammering, and I would beg her quietly to not say anything. That sheet was traumatic. I was so ashamed, and every time I went to the cabin after that I didn't dare look under the bed, though I was sure there was a musty smell that hadn't been there before. Around the age of 13 to 15, me and my 2 or 3 other friends, all male, would always come to my house to hang out, because my mom was, and remains, well, pretty freaking cool. Anyway, we would always go up to my room and play video games. Sometimes we would play hide and seek with the lights off, all kinds of shit. We were always inventing new games to play inside the house and out. Well, somehow, and to this day I still cannot imagine how or why, but it became a game for me to turn out the lights when all my friends were in my room, hunt them down, and dry hump them ferociously. This is not a joke. I had a bunk bed, so they would try and hide up there, or in the closet, no pun intended, and their motivation to hide was legitimate because if I found someone, they were getting humped. Over time this game devolved into me using humping as a weapon. Beat me in Mario Kart? Humped. Play a trick on me? Humped. Try and hump me as revenge for humping you? Even more humping. It eventually became a deterrent. Don't do that or for $1 we'll hump you. It was never sexual for me, and I don't know why I did it. I think I did it because in that time, at that age, the worst thing an immature straight boy can imagine is getting humped by a guy. So to torture them, I just made that a reality. It's normal for boys to challenge each other and try to find the thing that annoys each other off and kind of play with that dynamic. Side note, my room was right next to my grandma's room. She eventually witnessed the closed dry humping and heard the noises from all the running away and climbing and shit. She must have thought we were all gay as the day is long. I only have one memory that stands out from the rest. When I was a kid, I really wanted an iPhone. I'm 25, so when I was a kid, they were new. I looked online, and they were about $250 with a contract. When Christmas came around, my single mother, who was relatively poor, bought me a phone. But it wasn't an iPhone. I remember crying as soon as I opened it, and I saw my mother's heart break. I ran upstairs and wouldn't come out. I looked up online and the phone my mother bought me was also $250. So in my mind, why didn't she buy me the iPhone instead? It seemed like she did it on purpose. This was before I understood what contracts were. I still think about this memory all the time. Not because I didn't get an iPhone, but the way I reacted. It was by far the worst thing I've ever done. My mother just wanted to make me happy, and I acted like a spoiled brat. She cried literally all day in her room, and it didn't matter how many times I said I was sorry. After I realized how shitty I was behaving, she wouldn't come out. Later that night, when I was laying in my bed, she came in and snuggled with me and all was forgiven. Every Christmas since then, I don't ask for anything. It's become sort of an annoyance for people trying to shop for me. I refuse to tell anyone what I'd like to receive for gifts. I have mentally shifted my focus on giving and being thankful for what I receive. It feels dirty to ask for anything. I also don't want to make anyone ever feel the way I made my mom feel that one Christmas. I've been dying to share this story and oh my, this is the perfect place. This happened in kindergarten, so I would have been 4 to 5 at the time. I went to daycare at a family friend's house right across the street from ours most days after school. The bus drops me off right by my house and the daycare lady wasn't waiting outside, so I went to my house and was alone for a little bit. I got the bright idea that I wanted to teach my dog, a little terrier with long fur, how to cut hair. I took a pair of scissors and cut a little bit of her fur off, not a noticeable amount, and was like, okay, now your turn. Wanting her to cut my hair or something, I don't know lol. So in order to show her, I took the scissors and cut a large chunk of my hair out. My hair was long, thank God, but I freaked out trying to cover it up as the daycare lady rings the doorbell to pick me up. We go to her house, she notices the missing hair right away and calls my mom to tell her. Mom comes home and she is pissed off. Now obviously I'm not going to tell my mom that I wanted to teach the dog how to cut my hair. I'm not stupid enough to let her know how stupid I was. I kept telling her I didn't know how it happened, but eventually came up with the idea that I would blame it on a kid at school, so that's what I did. I picked the kid that annoyed me the most, who just happened to sit behind me, and suggested that he probably did it. My mom gets in touch with the teacher to explain what happened, and sets up a meeting with the teacher and the kid I blamed and his mom. I came up with a story as to why this kid would cut my hair. They believed me, and he was just completely in tears. I don't know if anything ended up happening to that kid, but we stayed in school together until 6th grade with this weird tension. The thought of trying to teach my dog how to cut hair and then blaming a totally innocent child for my patch of missing hair has haunted me to this day. In the 5th grade, my mom would pack my lunch and often give me too much food. Because of this, I would often give my food to others in the class. One day, unnamed classmate asked for food and I didn't give it to him. I think they were Oreos. We'll call him Jamie. Instead, I gave them to a female friend, who I kinda had a thing for, but was too afraid to ask out. We'll call her Rose. Jamie had admittedly asked first, but I didn't get butterflies in my tummy when I hung out with Jamie, like I did with Rose. Jamie was obviously devastated by this. He proceeds to ask me, incessantly, why I wouldn't give him the Oreos. I couldn't just tell him I gave it to Rose, because I liked her because I was, admittedly, too much of a bussy. He asked and asked and asked, and pleaded with me to know why he didn't get an Oreo. I looked Jamie in the face, in a moment of frustration and desperation, to get him to stop asking, and let me work Rose, and say it, because you're black. At that point in my life, I'd never seen my words have such immediate and dramatic effect on another person. Jamie lets out a shriek of what I can only call heartbreak. He breaks out crying immediately, and walks away with tears rolling down his face. I instantly felt like a giant piece of shit. From that point forward I was pretty much ostracized by the rest of my class except Rose, and one other friend. I don't know if 5th grade me was a little racist or just desperate to bang Rose. I still feel deeply guilty about it to this day. Way back in high school, does that count? We were in creative writing class. Teacher liked to expand our horizons and whatnot, so we had a segment on plays and improv. He split us up into groups of 4, and we had like 10 meters, probably less, to come up with the basic outline of a story involving 2 known heroes and villains. Back then, I was a very insecure, self-conscious shy kid, but I was aware of it and trying to overcome it, and all. By sheer chance, I got paired with the 3 weirdest kids in class. One guy, we'll call him Tom, who was this tall lanky guy who was just loud, socially unaware, and impulsive. There was, who we'll call Ashley, a short, stout, spray-tanned girl with much the same personality quirks as Tom. And finally, there was Nativa, a very quiet girl I knew from elementary school. So I do my best to try to push our team to think of something. Tom decides he'll be Superman. Ashley and Nativa agree that some rando characters from Mean Girls will do. And I can't think of diddly squat, so I pick Darth Vader. We decide to have Superman and Vader fight, while the 2 others commentate. Cheer? I don't know. So I try kind of pushing them to come up with something more, but that's it. That's all they want to do and they're satisfied. They've started having fun with their free time. So we start. My worst nightmares come true. Every other group has these detailed stories complete with conclusions, dialogue, twists. There was even an entire trial against none other than Darth Vader. Even my character was already taken. We get up there and announce our characters. I'm just kind of holding a calculator case to my face pretending to have mask. Our teacher gives us the go ahead and Tom puts up his dukes. He bounces up and down on his feet like an all too ready boxer. I pretend to put up my invisible lightsaber. He bounces his way over and basically runs me over. I wasn't expecting it, and Tom is a tall dude, so I topple over and frantically try to stay in character. By screeching "I am your father," I knocked some desks to the side and fell to the ground. All the while, Ashley and Nativa are just standing there, never doing or saying anything. My teacher ends the fiasco with, "We have a lot of work to do." I wouldn't have minded laughter. Laughing at me, laughing at the situation, any of that would have been fine. Even an awkward "this is weird" kind of laugh. But no, instead I was met with a wall of awkward silence from the class as we finished. I actually moved out of state for the following school year, but that was for totally different reasons. Not that I was complaining for the chance to restart, lol. Well, it's undoubtedly not as embarrassing and funny as the other stories here, but it's my own most awfully embarrassing moment, at least that I can think of. So, let's say I used to be a very well-mannered boy who was never heard cussing in our friend group. I was also kinda shy, and at the time, I don't think I was older than 8 or so. I was one of the few boys in our group that was ashamed to talk about sex and stuff. Most of us learn it really early on where I live. We were playing something like Truth or Dare. Most of the questions were sexual, so I figured it wouldn't be a good idea to choose truth as I didn't want being asked questions of that nature. I chose Dare. It was a mistake. They started with something mildly inconvenient, and because we could refuse to do a dare one time I chose not to do the first thing. Next thing they told me was to frick a tree. Shit. I really didn't want to do it. There were people passing everywhere, plus I wasn't that kind of boy. They pressured me so much that I decided frick it, I'ma do it and be done with it. So I went and started moving my hips back and forth, slamming against the tree. Did it for about 15ish seconds because they wanted me to do it for some time. I heard muffled laughing and giggles behind me, so I stopped. So I turn around and see them recording me with a phone. There weren't smartphones yet, just phones with shitty cameras that also had internet. Unfortunately, I panicked more than I ever had and started running towards them. They recorded me panicking and screaming too. Nice lol. What if my parents saw that? I thought. What if they show it to everyone? My reputation would be permanently damaged. After some screaming and begging, they stopped recording. I was crying so much lol. Next day they told me they had uploaded it on the internet and a lot of people saw it. I started crying again and begging them to tell me it's a lie. They just laughed at me. They were the teasing type of friends. So, guess what I did that same evening? I typed "little boy bangs a tree" in Google and all sorts of similar bullshit. Nice one. Makes sure I don't always sleep at night lol. I looked for an hour, maybe more, just to not find it and dread on it even more. They told me they lied a few days later, after they had finished teasing me. What a stupid boy I was, lol. Hope this doesn't go completely unseen. When I was 6 there was a school assembly. Before it started we were specifically told not to make any noise or fidget. We all sat there on the floor, legs crossed, probably around 120 kids aged 4 to 10. The headmistress was taking her time showing off the other kids' sheety artwork and handwriting, and the urge to pee was building. I knew I wasn't allowed to disrupt this important ceremony, so I focused and willed my bladder to calm the frick down. But that didn't work. I could feel the hotness building up in my underwear, before it bubbled out the leg holes, and spilled down into my shorts. I looked down, and for a few seconds I thought I was safe. I couldn't see a single drop of urine. I thought maybe it wasn't as bad as it felt. I relaxed so much that my bladder decided to see how far it could push it. Round 2 of the urine expulsion commenced, and as it started to leak out across the floor I did the only thing that one could do to avoid disrupting the headmistress's holy ritual. I started sweeping it back underneath myself. It took around 10 seconds for another kid to notice and shout ooh, and what seemed like 1/10 of a second for every other eye in the room to be firmly fixed on me wading in this golden pool of shame. I was taken away, and I'm assuming the assembly ended there. I had to wear the tattered old clothes of what I assumed was children who had died while at school for the rest of the day. On the plus side, I was allowed extra lunch for some reason. So get ready for this one. When I was around 15 years old I had the privilege of living just a few houses down from my girlfriend at the time. We grew up together from maybe 5 years old and both knew each other's families very well. The one exception was her mom. While she was always around, meaning she lived there, they weren't separated or anything. She was Korean, born and raised there, and spoke very little English. We lived in the US by the way. More on that later. Anyway, as 15-year-olds might do, we would mess around a lot. Like jackrabbits some would say. Not necessarily proud of it, but it is what it is. Well, one of the things we did was I would sneak over to her house in the middle of the night, sneak in the window and just do whatever. Sometimes it was just lay there together, other times we might watch a movie, other times we'd frick 3 or 4 times. One night, even though we had no plans to meet up, I decided I was going to surprise my girlfriend and sneak in. We used the spare bedroom for our late night get-ups and her bedroom was right next to the spare, so I planned on just going to get her. S-plan, right? So I proceed to do so. She always left the window unlocked, no screen, so I could get in and out easily. Well, to my surprise my girlfriend was already in the spare bedroom and in bed. So I thought to myself, perfect. Here I come, already rock hard af looking forward to what is next, and I slip into the bed next to her. Well, the thing about her parents was that they never slept in the same bed. A lot of times her mom would sleep in the front room on the floor. As my luck would have it, for some reason she decided that she wanted to sleep in the spare bedroom that night. That news didn't make it to me as we had no plans to get together. By the time I noticed it wasn't my girlfriend, it was too late. It was dark, and they had about the same build. I must have been extremely good at slipping into bed unnoticed. And her mom must have been a deep sleeper, and one hell of a strong snuggler. As soon as I got in she clung to me, and wouldn't let go. It took about 3 hours for me to figure out how to get her mom to release her grasp on me as she slept. I was so afraid to get caught. Worse yet, to get caught with a dick hard as frick into her mom, who I'd be unable to even communicate with. Somehow, by the grace of God, or whoever the frick was watching over me, I was able to make an escape unnoticed. Never once told my girlfriend what happened. Kept the secret till just now. I dodged one hell of a bullet. But I'm ashamed till this day about it. Too long. Didn't reduce to sneak into the spare with my girlfriend to frick in the middle of the night. Ended up slipping into bed with her mom instead. Spent 3 hours trying to pry away from her grip without waking her. Got away unnoticed, and have kept the secret till now. When I was about 12 years old, my parents informed me that I was going to a sleepover/trip to an amusement park with a family I didn't really know. I had met the husband and wife briefly at a wedding or something. The husband had a daughter my age from a previous marriage, and this was his visitation weekend with her. I was the entertainment and guest for the amusement park. Well, my mom homeschooled me for 3 years at this point, and I had no social skills. As an only child, I didn't know how to act around other children, and I was too familiar with adults, because I only interacted with my parents. I don't remember a whole lot about that weekend, except that I felt horribly awkward and scared the whole time. Every time I tried to make it better, it just got worse. For some reason I thought that, if we just acted like we were a big family having fun, it would be fun, so I tried to jump on the dad's back for a piggyback ride. Except he didn't know it was coming, and threw me to the ground. I cried and hid in a back bedroom. When my parents came to pick me up, I heard my mom talking to the stepmom. She said, "I don't know what's wrong with your daughter, but she was terrible. We don't want her here ever again." My mom apologized profusely, and then we left. My mom said she had never been so embarrassed in her life. I never really got over it. I was a really good kid generally. I made good grades. I tried to be helpful and empathetic to everyone. But I was also really lonely. And whenever I thought about reaching out, I would remember those words, and I'd cry, knowing that someone saw me trying my best, and said I was a terrible person. I know she was wrong, and the whole situation was fricked, but I think about that weekend at least once a week, more than 20 years later. There was a part of my childhood I wish I could forget. Scratch that. Every part of my childhood. There are some things you just never forget, no matter how hard you try. I have so many cringy moments that it's hard to choose just one for this, but this is one of those ones that I'm positive still gets brought up years later at parties and social gatherings. It was 7th grade. I was about 13. I just moved to the area, so it was a new school with all new people. I was the new kid, and we all know how awkward that is. I tried way too hard to fit in, so people would like me, which ended up backfiring and making everything worse, which by itself is an entire novel of embarrassing moments, or rather, one uncomfortably long moment. On top of an already uncomfortable situation, I single-handedly went and made everything worse. Thanks, teenage hormones. The classes were a blur other than one that stood out, history, or rather the history teacher. He was young, barely twice my age. I finally understood what tall, dark, and handsome was, and damn was it delicious. I looked forward to the class that I normally would have hated, just so I could stare at him. I studied harder than I ever had, or ever would, truth be told, so I could confidently raise my hand and answer every question, right, so he would notice me. I'd raise my hand and correct his spelling or grammar if I didn't know the answer, because I just wanted his attention. He coached soccer, so it became my new favorite sport. He loved Grey's Anatomy, so suddenly I did too. I would fantasize about things that would be considered illegal, immoral, and just plain creepy. I'd imagine all the scenarios in which he'd fall in love with me and have his way with me, and then I would have his babies. I got so caught up in my fantasies that I would write them out as erotic romance stories, so I could play out every last detail in my head. This alone is creepy and weird, but it isn't an embarrassing moment, if only you know about it. It becomes embarrassing when someone discovers your business secrets. What makes it even worse is the way it happens. It was the last day of 7th grade. Time was running out. Desperate for a way to leave my mark, I started writing for the last time. My hand shook as I penned a note describing in full detail my creepy crush along with a proclamation of love. I poured my heart and soul into the letter, then folded it and tucked it into the front pocket of my jeans for safekeeping. I'm really not sure what I expected to come out of it. I mean, I knew it would have been impossible and illegal, but I still had a sliver of hope that maybe he would realize the feelings were reciprocated. Suddenly overcome with anxiety, I decided the best way to deliver the note would be to leave it for him to find, so I could avoid direct confrontation. At the end of the school day, just before the buses came, I snuck back into the classroom and was about to leave the note on his desk when I heard someone coming down the hall. I started to panic, so I put the note in the hood of his sweatshirt instead, trying to play the whole thing off as forgetting something at my desk. Without seeing who came into the classroom, I raced out the door, down the hall, and outside to the buses without looking back. 7th grade was officially over. The cherry on top of this insane Sunday was a year or so later. when I tried joining his all-male soccer team under the pretense of thinking it was a co-ed team. When I was in kindergarten, 4 to 5. Not sure, I had this gym teacher that was fairly muscular with a loud intimidating voice. Fair enough to say I was petrified of her. One day in gym class we were playing a line game and were pretty spread out in our big gym. I had to pee really bad, but was too afraid to ask my teacher if I could go. So I just kind of went. There was a decent puddle on the floor and my pants were soaked. I just kind of played it off and no one questioned me. I got away with it for God knows how. Confidence is key, I guess. Later that day we were sitting in story time. At the time I had a boyfriend. Part of being a couple at our age was sitting closely and touching knees with each other. So romantic. Well, we touched knees and he turns to me and says, "Why are your pants wet?" And with a straight face I replied without skipping a beat, "My mom puked on my jeans this morning and we didn't have time to dry them after washing them." He just goes, "Oh, okay, cool." It wasn't mentioned again. I think about it every now and again and only occasionally want to die. P.S. My gym teacher is actually a really awesome, amazing lady whom I greatly admire. Too long. Didn't read. I peed my pants in kindergarten during gym class because I was afraid of gym teacher. My boyfriend later asked why my pants were wet when he touched them. I said my mom puked on them and I didn't have time to dry them. He bought it. Was about 15. Needed to use the toilet on an overseas school trip, but my room and the inn didn't have a toilet, so I had 3 options. The communal toilet, the teacher's rooms, the girls' rooms. A dude who hadn't showered in 5 days was in the toilet having his first shower. He forgot to pack a towel and hadn't showered, so we forced him in. With the help of one of the junior teachers. Thanks Ms. Kaur, if you're out there reading this. So that's the communal toilet out of the picture. I wasn't going to ask the teachers. That was the room for the female teachers. And one of them was my RCY officer who was known to be quite strict. So that's out. Although I did go back as an alumni to help out in the RCY, and she was so happy to see me. Hi Miss Sham. The last option, the only reasonable option, was the girls' room. So I knocked on the door and asked. They said one of the girls was still showering, so I had to wait a bit. As a bonus I got to watch whatever they were watching on the TV. My room didn't have one either, at least one that worked. When she came out, she was only holding a towel and drying her hair with it. So I saw everything. I know, more embarrassing for her than me, but still. Had never seen a member of the opposite sex naked before. No, mothers don't count. She screamed really loudly and jumped back into the toilet, and I put my hands up and got out of the room. I did get to use the toilet in time though, so that's that. The girl wasn't someone I really spoke to before and definitely not after. More of those kind of things, where you knew each other existed, but didn't ever talk. Seems like she didn't hold it against me though. Met her at an Ike after graduation. Though I only nodded in acknowledgement when she called out to me. Was going through some shit then. Mother had cancer. Terminal at the time. Ike. HM. This is a weird one I still occasionally do to this day, but not often, and nowhere near as much as in childhood. I don't have autism or any diagnosis as on the spectrum, but all my life, especially early childhood, I would do stimming type behavior common in ASD. No doctor really knew why, and my mom asked several, but since I was developing normally otherwise it was just chalked up to excitement or possibly an OCD thing, but harmless. As an adult, after trying to figure out what this was online, I believe what I had/have is called complex motor stereotypies. My 2 children also appear to have it, and my brother also occasionally had behavior similar to it, but to less of an extent. Stuff I did was holding my breath/breathing in weird patterns, crossing my eyes, shaking, moving/flapping my hands in front of my face, facial grimacing, pacing, and shaking my head side to side. Often I did these behaviors when lost in thought, excited, nervous, or feeling other strong emotions. It was like the movements were an urge, a physical way of getting my emotions out. I did them pretty frequently as a young child. Once I was old enough to feel embarrassed and to want to be seen as normal/not strange or overly noticeable to other kids my age. I learned quickly how to control it and almost never did it in front of people at school. However, I continued at home for some time. More or less cause home was safe, even if my mom didn't like me doing these behaviors and would tell me to stop. I knew my mom and my brother, who had seen me do them 100 times, wouldn't make fun of me. But I wouldn't do them in front of others and would be embarrassed to be caught. As an adult, though it's much less often, I still feel the urge to do these behaviors. Occasionally if I'm alone I do, but it was nearly every day as a kid, whereas now it's more like maybe once a month or so. My oldest daughter mainly flaps her hands when excited. My youngest does more varied behaviors like I did, rolling her eyes back, or going cross-eyed, shaking, grimacing, rocking on her feet, and toe walking. Oldest is otherwise neurotypical, youngest has speech delays, and was diagnosed as having ASD. 7th grade, Intro to Spanish. We were doing an exercise where we were supposed to use some adjectives to finish a sentence we were given. For instance, mi casa sy. So it was my turn, and my sentence was mi actress favorita sy. And I drew a complete blank. I couldn't remember a single adjective. The teacher was staring at me with his eyebrows raised, and all my classmates were turning around to look at me. So I decided to wing it, just say something, and if it's wrong, at least that's better than silence, right? So I said mi actress favorita es Pamela Anderson. And immediately my brain goes, what the frick, that's not an adjective and I don't even know who she is, except apparently she has big tit. Everyone started laughing, of course, and the teacher was like, okay, so you could say she's pretty, maybe she's nice. And then there was another long pause while he waited for me to actually do the exercise. But I was so mortified I couldn't have told him my name if he'd asked. I just stared at my desk until he said, okay, good job Mr. McFall, who would like to do this one correctly? People made fun of me for that until I graduated high school. As the story mutated from the actual event to McFall has a thing for Pamela Anderson and can't stop talking about her to McFall got caught masturbating to a picture of Pamela Anderson in implausible location. I didn't even know what masturbation was when the rumor started. I was around 10 years old and had just watched Grease for the first time at a sleepover. The other girls at the sleepover loved the movie and would continue rewinding the tape to watch the scenes with songs multiple times to try to learn all of the lyrics. A few days later, our very conservative Christian neighbors invited my family over for dinner and board games. We had never spent time with them prior to this, so I'm not sure where the invite came from, but my parents accepted. After dinner, we started playing one of those trivia games where you get a card containing the names of celebrities, TV shows or movies, and you have to give clues to help the other players guess what's on the card. Finally, it was my turn and the card I pulled was for the movie Grease. Easy, I thought. However, although I had just watched the movie a million times just a few days earlier, I couldn't recall a single quote from the movie. As seconds ticked by, my team pressured me to say something, to give some sort of clue. In that moment, only phrase I could recall was from the song Summer Nights, when the men sing tell me more, like did she put up a fight? So I said it, and when nobody said anything, I repeated it a second time. If I had sang it, they might have gotten the reference, but instead, I thought it would be better to say the word slowly and clearly. Obviously, at 10, I didn't fully grasp the meaning of what I was saying. No one said anything. No one even tried to attempt to guess. Everyone in the room just stared at me or glanced at each other until the timer finally ran out. I remembering saying something like, how could you guys not get this one? It's obviously Grease. Unfortunately, I didn't fully understand how mortifying the situation was until many years later, when I watched the movie again. I was about 6-7 years old, sitting in the end of term assembly with the whole school. We were all sat on the floor of the gym/assembly hall. Polished wood, you know the drill. Perfect for amplifying and resonating noises throughout the whole room. Throughout the whole assembly I was holding a massive fart, and the end couldn't come soon enough. Like really, it got to the point where I was getting crampy. This windy boy needed to come out now. Head teacher is closing the session, so we are very close to the end. I tried to hold it as much as I could, but alas, it just wasn't happening. I figured if I unclench ever so slightly it'll be a silent waft, or worst case, a SBV, silent but violent. Either way I could pin the blame on someone else. Lol nah. Pop. All came out, like a trombone blown through a loudspeaker. Shook the floor and everything. Whole school burst out laughing, and I put my head down to try and hide from the embarrassment. I got all the pointed fingers, and all the lols. The playground backlash didn't last too long afterwards, and I found it funny anyways. My then and still current bestie told me that no one knew I farted until I dropped my head in shame. If I just carried on laughing I'd have gotten away with a FAHRTY butt trombone. Damn kid brain. I'm sure there's other stories, but this one is my fave. I went on a family vacation. One day I went day drinking with my dad. We went to a nice village spot and drank and ate good food. We had planned to have food with my grandma, uncles, and niece. They pick us up in this 8-seater van, and we drive toward our destination which is an hour away. I was 18. I felt like peeing, but I was slightly drunk, and I thought I could hold it. The road got bumpy, and then one bump too many pushed me over the edge. You'd think I'd just pee myself on front of the family, right? Nope. I told our driver to stop right now, because I needed to pee. He didn't listen, and said next stop. I can feel my bladder rupturing from the inside. My insides burn and twist and it hurts. I'm just about to open the door of a moving cart abyss when he takes the cue and pulls over. But too late. I feel the stream coming, and for some reason I thought it was a good idea to grab the head of my penlet, which let out a stream of piss which collected in my foreskin, and it kept building up. As I stood up my hand slipped, and this spasm of piss squirmed inside my pants and through it, dripping onto my family as I faced toward them to get out from the back of the car. So I ran out half dripping in piss, knowingly pissed on everyone in the car, and then I run to the front of this house, nowhere else to pee, and start pissing on their fence. My dad comes toward me with the most straight face and hands me a single ply tissue. I tell him thank you, tap a bit on my pants, and it soaks up immediately. Walk back to a silent car, avoid eye contact with everyone, and sit and pretend that I didn't piss on everyone and myself. The car smelled like pee the whole vacation trip. Probably still does. Oh my god, I've been waiting for this. The single most intense moment of guilt of my childhood. Big pointless story coming up. In the 5th grade I transferred to a new school, private to public. It took me months and months of awkward fumbling to get to know anyone, and no one wanted to be friends with me because I was a private school freak. My mom made me join the cheerleading team and go to all the stupid dances. After what seemed like forever I got in good with the popular kids of 5th grade, just in time for this huge Washington DC field trip. My parents had just divorced earlier the same year, but had come together to send me on this trip, which was super expensive. It was super special to me. I looked forward to it for like 8 months, which is forever to a 10-year-old. I was rooming with these two girls who were best friends, and their mom was our chaperone. Girl A, named Bailey, was the ringleader of the whole school. She was so nice to me at first, and I was thrilled. Girl B was her sidekick. Almost all the girls on the bus had pillows from home with old pillowcases on them for our class to sign on the trip. Our first morning in DC I wrote a joke on Bailey's pillow. We all called each other silly names as jokes, and that morning Bailey wouldn't wake up to the alarm. So I wrote on her pillow, "Wake up moron. DC is waiting." I didn't mean anything malicious by it at all, was just joking around. She was furious. The entire trip she tortured me for that. Yelled at me on the bus in front of everyone, made me sleep on the floor in our hotel room because she didn't want to share a bed with me. Only 2 beds available in each suite, and sidekick's mom had one. Called me names, had the chaperone yell at me, the whole 9 yards. I tried to scribble out my comment in Sharpie, but then she cried and said it looked even more ugly. Looking back, I'm sure they lied to the adult chaperone about what happened, because I was obviously a super timid, painfully awkward kid who wasn't a bully in the slightest. But I had no idea as to why everyone, even the adult in the room, seemed to hate me with a burning passion for the rest of the trip. I should have told a teacher, but I didn't, because I was afraid of getting in trouble for calling Bailey a moron, even if it was a joke. Anyway, It ruined my field trip and was like living in a shy 5th grader's nightmare for a solid week. She continued to milk the incident far into middle school, but after that everyone kinda knew she was the school bully and forgot about it / didn't care anymore. I couldn't think about the incident without shame until years later. So I'll say it now, go frick yourself, Bailey. I stand by my signature beach. When I was young I started watching House Maryland. You know, with the asshole irredeemable diagnostician with a Vicodin problem. I have had so this was the focal point of my hyper-focus for like 2 years straight. Let me preface by saying I've always been a super kind person, and if I don't have any self-confidence in anything else, that's been my one shining quality. I was about 15 at the time and I really admired this dude. I was going through a phase and trying to find myself. So I just made myself more and more like him. I developed a fake lump. I have always had bad gastric problems, so they gave me trazodone for pain. It's not an opiate or even a strong medication, and I took it like candy with no water. My high school had 2 floors and I took the elevator up to the 2nd floor every day instead of the stairs. When the administration called me on it, because I was obviously not handicapped, I told them my leg hurt and acted like a dick and continued to take the elevator anyway. I was a jackass to my best friend Joey and distanced myself on purpose. I quoted House every single chance I could get. I mean, my transformation was a weeks-long intensive process for a 15-year-old. Joey knew what was going on because we watched House together on NBC, even if we were at our own houses. We talked online and commented on the show. Eventually I got so bad and irritating that he and 2 of my other friends staged an intervention and were basically like, if you don't go back to being your regular self we aren't going to be friends with you anymore and you won't make any new friends because House doesn't have any friends because he's a dick. They each took me a few days a week and made me hang out with them and wouldn't let me watch House. I missed like 3 weeks worth of episodes. Eventually I stopped because I liked my friends and I realized I'm not actually a 55-year-old doctor with an addiction problem. I have never done any drugs besides weed which I didn't even like. To this day I don't know why I did that and it makes me anxious even thinking about how stupid I looked. My friends and I decided to roll down a hill and see who could roll the fastest. I found the perfect spot and focus on my centrifugal force and show the neighborhood that a girl could be the fastest. That'll show the boys. I got to the bottom and saw that I was the first. I jumped up and down laughing and screaming. That'll show you boys. Bahahahaha. They started arriving at the bottom and saying ooh what's that smell. The kids were gagging and screaming and pointing at me. I started to smell it. The smell was acidic and hot. It burned my nostrils and my eyes started to water. I tried running away from it, but it followed me. That's when everyone realized that I was covered in mud. I was covered in cold dog diarrhea. I had rolled in multiple piles of it on my way down. It was in my hair. It was all over my body. I couldn't escape it. Everyone started laughing and making fun of me, and I decided to run home crying. I get home crying and run into the house and my mom says, "Oh baby what's wrong? OMG get outside now." I felt abandoned. My mother had now disowned me and I was destined to live outside. This was my life now. She came out dressed in galoshes and a rain jacket. She then told me to stand in the driveway as she hoses me off. I screamed, cried, the way little kids do, like a high-pitched howl. I was holding myself and shivering and the neighbors came out to watch me in my shame. Too long, didn't read. I went from being a victorious winner and proving to the neighborhood that girls can roll down hills faster than boys, to being covered in sheet, mocked by the kids, banished by my mother, and hosed off in front of the neighborhood. I still freaking won though. I still can't believe that I actually did this, but here it goes. When I was probably around 11, I had a really good friend named Matt. We lived in this nice mountain community where there were quite a few wealthy people, including Matt's family. He and his family went to the same church as my family, and they had kids that were all similar ages to me and my siblings, so naturally our families gravitated towards each other. Anyway, Matt's dad had just bought a new boat, which was very nice, so he invited us all over for a barbecue and then took us out on his boat. So there we are riding in this incredible boat and I get bored because riding in a boat is fun for like 5 minutes and I'm there looking for something to do when I see this nail just sitting at the bottom of the boat. I take the nail and scratch the side of the boat with it a little. The water splashes up on it and the scratch disappeared. I thought that, since the water makes the scratches go away, I should practice drawing Sonic the Hedgehog, which was a favorite pastime of mine. I call over to Matt and proceed to show him my sweet Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails art that I'm scratching into his dad's brand new boat. It was good times. The boat ride ends after about an hour or so, and we go back up to their house for some dessert and to hang out some more. In the midst of playing Medal of Honor Frontline on GameCube, Matt's dad finds us and asks Matt to come with him. I'm like, whatevs, and kept killing Nazis. 10 minutes later Matt comes back accompanied by his dad and my parents. I should have felt nervous at this point because my dad looked furious, but I knew that the scratches were washed off by the water, so I felt pretty good. We walked back down to the boat where my dad proceeds to show me 45 minutes worth of Sonic the Hedgehog artwork. This was a very uncomfortable experience, not in the least, because I'm a horrible artist. To everyone's credit, there was no yelling, well, minimal yelling, and I don't remember getting in much trouble, which was probably chalked up to me being a stupid 11-year-old, but that was the last time that I went out on that boat and the last time we hung out as families. It's been just about 16 years now since that happened, and I can still vividly see the expression that Matt's dad had. On the plus side though, my Sonic artwork never got any better, so I haven't felt the need to scratch it into anyone else's boat. There's too many to count, but I got a sliver from an old wooden teeter-totter on the last day of grade 2 and a teacher had to stare at my bearers to get it out. Then they took away the teeter-totters. I peed into a garbage can. We were on an overpass trip in junior high because I drank too much iced tea at dinner and the hallway to the washroom was locked. I dug this giant hole in the backyard when I was like 10 and my parents were pissed. In grade 6 I gave this giant presentation about Star Trek to the kids in grade 5. They laughed at me and I started crying. Also in grade 6 I jokingly pulled out my friend's chair when she was about to sit down and she hit the floor hard and started crying. In grade 8 I straight up said to a teacher while waving my hand through the air like a GD, "We are not in this hallway," when he told us to stop hanging around outside the gym. He just shook his head at me. In shop class, grade 8, I hid under a table and cried when the teacher was mean to me. We got called into the principal's office after we photocopied like 100 pictures of our librarian's face, cut them out, and put them around the yearbook office. I wrote this story in grade 3. It was like a fully illustrated book about cats going into space and the teacher noticed and made me read it in front of the class. Told this story on another thread once, but it got buried. When I was about 7, my friend invited me to spend the day over at his grandmother's house in the countryside with him. She had an enormous backyard with tons of trees, a big garden, gazebo, koi pond, and, unknown to me at the time, a sewage pond. My friend and I had been playing outside for a couple hours or so having a lot of fun, and I guess neither of us were really thinking straight. I was chasing after him, and suddenly he ran up to the gate of the sewage pond, which was behind a chain link fence, quickly opened it and rushed in. After running past the gate, I noticed what looked like a big patch of lightly colored grass, and for whatever reason in my excited mind, I jumped in, thinking it was a solid surface. I was completely submerged. A brown watery mix of sheet, piss and whatever else got in my eyes, ears, nose and mouth. At first, I thought it was just muddy water. I had never seen one of these things before. However, after climbing out, I noticed how shocked and disgusted my friend looked. After telling me what I had just basically cannonballed into, I was freaking mortified. It didn't help that I had OCD and was a big germaphobe. I wanted to puke and started slowly walking up to the back porch shuddering, whereupon seeing me, my friend's mother and grandmother immediately busted out laughing. They had assumed I'd fallen in the koi pond, but after my friend told them what it actually was, they brought me a towel and led me to the shower. I had to wear some of my friend's clothes and he never let me live down the incident. Too long. Didn't read. I jumped into a sewage pond as a kid and got soaked in sheet water. Not directly something I did, but in 5th grade we had a project where we had to invent some kind of way to eat spaghetti unconventionally and create it. Our parents could help us and then bring it into class so they could be tested out. I think the key was that you couldn't use your hands. After we saw each other's inventions, the class would vote and the winner would get a prize. My dad is an electrician and mechanic, so I had the idea to get him help me make a machine using switches made from those electronic rotating lollipops, so I could control a fork hanging over the spaghetti with a remote control mounted onto a board where the plate would go. Theoretically, it would be able to move back and forth and also spin around so it could twirl the spaghetti onto it. We spent forever working on it and I made it look all nice, painted it. It was so cool looking and worked great. I was so confident that it was going to win that we didn't bother testing it with actual spaghetti. Relevant later. On the deadline day our teacher cooked a huge pot of spaghetti and gave us all some so that we could see if our creations worked, and we learned it was going to be filmed. We arranged our desks in a circle and someone with a video camera walked from person to person and got them to show how their invention worked on film. I was so excited because I thought I was going to be the clear winner. When it was my turn, I showed the camera how the fork moved around and everyone seemed impressed. The plate of spaghetti was put underneath and I moved the fork forward and dumped it all in my lap. The control for the forward/backward movement of the fork was too vigorous and it basically just scooped it all up like a spoon and threw it at me. And it was on camera. People laughed. I didn't win. That was more than 15 years ago and I still think about sometimes. I'm sure I've done more embarrassing things, but for some reason this one sticks with me. I honestly think it has to do with the setting and the architecture of the building. I was probably like 5 or 6 years old, and I went with my mom to the bank. It was one of those gorgeous old banks. A huge open space and everything was like granite or marble or something. Hard surfaces, important for the story. Anyway, she's filling out a check or something on one of those tables with all the slips. The table is sort of in the middle of this massive open bank. I'm bored and I'm walking around. I go behind the table and decide to try and climb up the back. I grab onto the long slip organizing document tray which is the length of the table. I go to pull myself up and the thing isn't attached to the table at all. I pull the entire thing off the back of the table and it absolutely smashes into the floor. It bounces over and over on the granite/marble and it's honestly the loudest noises I had heard in my life to that point. It's echoing like the damn horn of Helm Hammerhand and I'm frozen in absolute panic. It honestly seemed like it went on for 5 minutes, but it was probably like 10 seconds at most. I remember my mom being really cool about it. So were the people at the bank. I still think about that every now and then randomly, but always I remember it whenever I go into one of those old school banks or see/hear someone drop something that kinda bounces around and clangs and echoes. There was once an old Korean couple running a discount store in my local store plaza. They would sell a mishmash of items, mostly just cheap antiques or discount toys. They were very nice, but English was not their first language. Well, one day, my mom decides that instead of taking me to the bank to deposit some money, she'd let me go to the discount store in the same plaza so that I could look at fun toys, and told me that if there was something I liked, I should show it to her and she'll think about buying it. So she drops me off inside the store and goes to the bank next door. I'm super excited because my mom just told me that I could find a toy to buy. I quickly browse through the selection of toys and spot a cool looking army man toy. I pick it up and decide to show it to my mom, who is outside of the store. So, 7-year-old me is practically giddy as I make my way over to my mom, and just as I open the door to leave, I hear an elderly man shout something from the cash register. I stop dead in my tracks and turn around to see a pissed off looking man make his way to me, speaking in a language I do not know. I'm obviously scared because I can't figure out what I did wrong to make the store owner so mad, and know he's yelling things in a language I don't know. He finally reaches me, and I was so scared that I couldn't properly explain what I was doing, and all I managed to say was, "I'm going to tell mom." He looks at me for a second, and then grabs a toy in my hand, and begins to try and yank it from me. I try to hold on to it, but he was obviously stronger than me, and he manages to take full possession of it. He then yells some more things in Korean, and says, "Get out of here, thief." I go crying to my mom, who is at the bank doing important stuff, and all she sees is her son bawling with tears. I tell her I want to go home, but she instead goes to the store with me in tow to try and figure out why her son is now crying. We get to the store and she goes straight to the register and asks the elderly man behind it why her son ran to her crying. He tells my mom about how I tried running off with a toy without paying, and my mom just looks at me, looks at him, and they facepalms. She explains that she was the one who told me to show her a toy that I wanted to buy, but she didn't expect me to leave the store before she finished at the bank. The couple running the store have a laugh with my mom. All parties apologize for the misunderstanding, and my mom buys me the toy. I then go on to tell this story years later on Reddit. Too long. Didn't read. I went to the store, picked a toy to show my mom who was next door, and got yelled at by the store owner for trying to leave the store with items I didn't pay for. Where do I start? Honestly, one time I wanted to check out what my poop looked like, so I used a sieve to fish it out, and for some reason instead of putting it back in the bowl I put it in a plastic bag and threw it onto the roof of the next door neighbor's shed. I also pooped in the garden several times for fun. One time I was camping at a friend's small caravan, had bagged the guest room to myself, woke up in the middle of the night dying for a piss and the toilet was a block away, so I had the bright idea that I would attempt to piss in a bottle, but didn't want to leak any onto her carpet, so I put my pillow under me, and the piss went everywhere including the carpet, and soaking my pillow, so I took my piss-soaked pillow, walked to the camp kitchen, and chucked it in the bin. One time I found my mom's dildo, decided to clean it off and give it a go. I once cyberbullied someone so hard on MSN the police came to my house and told me off in front of my whole family. I used to have a bunk bed as a kid and I'd write my dirty secrets on the above panels, like how I wanted to have sex with Jim Carrey, and one time me and mom were lying on said bed talking, and she started reading out loud the things written, and I screamed and shoved her off. One time at camp with school I needed to pee very early in the morning, and I'm assuming I slept naked at this point, because I walked all the way to the toilets completely naked right past my sleeping peers. I used to have tickle fights with my granddad, and sometimes, while he was tickling me, I would yell back "rape." Because I thought it was funny. Spoiler alert, it was not funny. One of these happened only last year. In 6th grade I was having a really intense argument with a girl in my class about which of us was better at swimming. I was from BC, so I basically swam almost every day growing up, but I was living in Yellowknife, NWT at the time, where most kids skate like how BC kids swim. The girl I was arguing with happened to also swim a lot, which made me feel like she was taking away my thing. It's also important to note that I was an outcast at the time. I was only in the knife for 2 years, and I went to a different school for each of them. I was bullied a lot in 5th grade, and to a lesser extent in 6th, so I was heavily on the defensive in middle school. One of the main reasons for being bullied in a relatively conservative town was that my parents are lesbians. Kids would say the nastiest things about me and my parents, the worst of this being when a kid said I was in an incestuous relationship with them. There was a lot of "lol, it's we must also be a lesbian and that's weird," to put it briefly. Anyway, a lot of kids in my grade, from all the classes, were in the hallway, watching this unfold. Being 6th graders, there was a lot of meaningless grandstanding. The other girl said something like "I could swim circles around you, you get the idea." The other girl goes to challenge me. She says something like "Come to the pool with me, if you're that good. I'll school you." I then looked her dead in the eye, something I struggled with for a long time, so it was pretty rare, and said "You might "school me, but I'm going to screw you." Cue immediate "oh" reactions from most of my grade. Cue my confusion. Cue me learning throughout the rest of the day that screw means frick. Lesbian rumors intensify, and I accidentally threatened to rape a girl in my class. Edit. I turned out to be very bisexual, so the kids were sort of right. It has nothing to do with my moms, though. When I was 9, I was spending the night at my best friend's house. We had been friends since we were very little and could say or do anything around each other, and I thought it was impossible to feel embarrassed around her. I was very wrong. Anyway, I have had anxiety since I was very little, and sometime that evening started to get a stomachache, which was normal for me when I was feeling uptight. The stomachache started to get worse and worse, and I tried to ignore it all night until it was time to go to bed, and I had trouble falling asleep. I managed to doze off despite feeling like garbage. At some point during the night, maybe around 1 AM, I get up and realize that I don't feel good at all. I'm sweating and my stomach is sick, and I don't know what the hell is going on. I decide to get up to go to the bathroom, but before I can, I vomit violently over the side of the pull-out futon and onto the rug. I finally finish retching and look down at what I've done, and I'm mortified. What am I supposed to do? Do I get up and tell my best friend's parents that I just ruined their daughter's clean carpet because of a bout of the stomach flu? I'm sweating and confused, and my head is swimming. I got up to go to the bathroom and clean myself up, and I feel like I have to use the toilet. In usual stomach flu fashion, you get to suffer through both ends. I get into the bathroom and sit down, and I throw up again all over the bathroom floor. I'm crying and my stomach is gurgling, and I'm so embarrassed I wanna die. By the time I'm done in the bathroom, I'm sweating and exhausted. My clothes have vomit on them, and all I can do is crawl back in bed and wish for the night to be over. I lay down and try to sleep. I wake up every few hours to vomit over the side of the bed onto the floor, and I'm unable to make it to the bathroom in time and have an accident. I'm soaked in sweat and almost delirious. I'm very dehydrated at this point, and I end up laying in bed covered in my own filth until morning. The next day, my best friend's mom goes to use the bathroom and sees puke all over the tile floor, and she goes into my best friend's room to check on us. She finds me passed out, drenched in sweat as well as covered in vomit and other unpleasant things. She wakes me up and asks if I'm okay, and I can barely answer because I'm just suffering at this point, and I'm too sick to even feel slightly embarrassed about what happened. She calls my dad, it was his custody weekend, and explains what may have transpired during the night. She still can't get a straight answer out of me other than I got sick, and he brings me clean clothes and medicine and drives me home to rest. I still hung out with my childhood friends many times after that, and she never mentioned it. I'm pretty sure the futon had to be thrown out. It wasn't until I got older and realized how disgusting the entire ordeal was that I became mortified. If I had just woken my friend's parents up, it could have avoided at least a tiny bit. I went on my very first trek when I was 10 years old with a couple of boys and their rather stern grandmother. Since I was young and obstinate and a girl, I refused to pee behind a tree when I needed to go because I was afraid someone would see my bare bottom. After a couple of hours, the trek was complete and we were walking the last 100 meters or so down the hill. I had managed to coax my bladder into submission thus far and figured if I was able to sit down in the car soon I'd be fine. However, the grandma decided it was imperative for us to drink some fresh water from a fountain set up on the side of the hill because hydration is important. Simply putting my hands under the freezing water was enough to shock my tumescent bladder into a righteous fury. I took a couple of tiny sips and began hot-footing it down the hill. When we got to the car, miraculously sans mishap, I jumped into the back seat and squeezed my thighs and contracted my kegels into oblivion. But the grandma instructed me to come out of the car, remove my mountain boots, and place them in the trunk like her boys did. So I somehow managed to get out, undo all those ridiculous laces, chuck them in the back, and hop back inside with my bladder sloshing angrily against a particularly sensitive pelvic nerve. But nope. She calls me out again. I didn't put my shoes neatly to the side with my laces tucked into the boot. I get out. I tuck them in. I get back inside. I feel a sudden warmth spread beneath my seat and realize I'm pissing myself. Suddenly and irrevocably. And it feels so freaking good while utterly traumatizing me. In a matter of seconds I'm sitting in a pool of my own urine. This may be a good time to tell you the seats were of leather. So my clothes soaked up most of everything. I used my carefully guarded packet of 10 napkins to feverishly mop up what I could and throw the sopping evidence out the door before everyone sat in the car. Then I tied my cardigan around my waist and did a little wiggle for the final swipe. Stealth level at a decent 89.3% I thought. 15 years later, I meet the same boys at a wedding. They have grown to be quite charming and handsome. I believe I had blossomed into quite a fine specimen myself. We all have a very nice and witty conversation about what we have been up to all our lives, until my mom sees us and decides to come over and gush about old times. Specifically, remember when you guys went on a little trek and my poor minx had a little accident? They freaking remembered and had apparently waited politely for me to clean up before getting in the car. Thanks mom. I have several that haunt me right before I fall asleep and worse, right after I wake up. They keep me humble. I sheet my pants during church because the bathroom was occupied. I told my dad, and when the bathroom was open, he washed my pants in the sink and I wore soaked, sheet-stained pants for the rest of the church service. I was 8ish. In high school I was involved in a gang, and while riding the bus during the summer we ran into some opposing gang members. They sat in the back, mad dogging us. When we got to our stop, my homies and I got out. As I was stepping down the steps, I met eyes with the biggest dude there. I gave him a mean look, feeling like a badass. I didn't watch my step. Instead I watched his face gradually change to oh shit when he realized I was about to fall on my face on the sidewalk. The bus didn't wait 1 second, and it was gone. One more. Okay. I was staying at my best friend's house. I might have been 6 to 9 years old. It was after a concert we went to, so I didn't plan to bring any clothes. He let me borrow some PJs. They were medium bottoms, and I wear large. But I squeezed in them. He has an older sister who was 13 to 15 at the time. I always had a crush on her. She was sitting in the bedroom with her best friend and I walked in. They looked at me and then down at my pants and bursted out laughing. I thought they were laughing at my pants. I go into a bathroom and realize I was fully erect. I wish they laughing at my pants. Too long. Didn't read. I sheet my pants during church. I faceplant a sidewalk while mad dogging a gang member. My crush laughed at my pennet. When I was about 12 or so, my mom would send me, my brother, and my sister to spend the summer with my grandma in Roanoke Valley. I didn't like this grandma much at all. She was very mean, and I hated that my mom would send us there. One day, my brother and sister was playing hide and seek outside in the small front yard and in the house. I found the perfect, most discreet hiding spot ever in the bathtub shower, lights off, with the curtain halfway closed. My thinking at the time was, if someone was trying to find me, they would open the bathroom, turn on the lights, see the curtain halfway closed, and look elsewhere, because if someone was there, surely they would close the curtain all the way. Guinness, right? So I'm standing in there, heart pounding, sweating, from running up the steps, to get to my awesome hiding spot. A minute or two later, you hear the bathroom door open, lights on, and door close. My mind. I'm like frick. They found me already. The shower curtain didn't move, but I heard the toilet seat being put down or up. I slightly internal giggled to myself. Why would my brother think I'm hiding in the toilet? Since I'm standing in the back of the shower, there is a small gap between the back wall of the shower and the shower curtain. I take a small peek to see WTF he's doing, but instead of seeing my brother, I'm looking at the back of my mean grandmother's head. She proceeds to take the mother of all sheets, with grunt sounds resembling two male wildebeest fighting for her dominance. I'm frozen, because she would absolutely kill me if she knew I was there, and standing in her bathtub with my shoes on would be even worse. I'm trying to hold my breath as long as I could, but then, like that baseball in the movie Field of Dreams, I was instantly hit with the smell of her intestinal process collard greens and pig feet that has now exited her ass. She cooked the night before. I tried to breathe through my mouth, so I didn't have to smell it, but when I did that, I think I actually tasted it, so breathing it in short burst would have to suffice. I remember thinking, if you're there God please come now. She finally get up from making devil stew in the toilet and leave the bathroom. I wait about 20 more seconds for her to go back to wherever she was in the house before I make my escape. I go downstairs, outside, and see my brother and sister on the porch. They asked where were you? I thought they would clearly see the PTSD stresses look I had on my face. I proceed to tell them where I had been. I'm now 40, and to this day, they cry laughing every single time we mention it. Reading through the comments, I started remembering a few situations. It's quite long. I'll save the most embarrassing for last. First was when I was about 9 years old. Before the euro was present in the EU, I found an Italian coin at school, and it looked like the Austrian 10 shilling coin. So I was curious if I could fool the vending machine to buy a drink, as I never got any pocket money. So after school my brother picked me up, and I said I still wanted to buy a drink. He said it's cheaper at the store next door. I tried to convince him to buy it there, but he overruled me. At the store I tried to say I wasn't thirsty anymore, but he looked at me weirdly and put a drink in my hand. At the cashier I must have looked nervous as hell and gave him the coin to pay. Of course the cashier noticed. I looked down and turned red as a tomato. My brother looked at me very disappointed and paid it from the little money he had left. Also didn't get pocket money. Our family was quite poor. Still feel bad to this day, even though we are on really good terms. Second story was when I was about 10. I have 3 older siblings, and one evening we were all in one room. My brothers in their bunk bed and my sister and me on their floor for a sleepover. So I cuddled with my sister, my head lying on her belly, and she started goofing around, pressing her lips together and exhaling, making motor sounds, and I felt it vibrating very strongly. So I yelled out, "Wow, you're my personal vibrator." And everyone burst out laughing. Innocent me didn't get it until later. The next stories are both from when I was around 16, which makes them really embarrassing for me. Hope this counts, as is technically not childhood anymore. So the less embarrassing one was when I went with my first boyfriend's family to a friend of theirs, whom I had met already. I didn't know he had a brother though, so when his brother opened the door I enthusiastically went for a hug. Instead I hit his lips with my no. I apologized. Then behind him saw the brother I knew, and felt even worse for accidentally kissing a guy I'd never met. Last but not least, my parents/family never really taught me proper hygiene, so when I was 16 I chose laziness over showering when it was necessary, thinking nobody would notice. Then one day, after sleeping over at my boyfriend's, his family had planned a big get together with around 16 people they knew at a friend's of theirs. Me being too lazy to shower after still having come inside me, having a really heavy period, noticing how bad I smelt, I thought nobody would notice. So we arrived there, and they had a dog. So as an animal lover I took the opportunity to get away from people who could smell me and squatted down with closed legs. The dog was quite big and came close real quick. I saw him start sniffing and trying to get closer to my crotch, but I couldn't keep him. He took a really deep breath at my crotch, backed away whining, putting his paw over his nose trying to get the stench away as I tried to get up quick so nobody would figure out. I still don't know if anyone noticed as they were still busy greeting each other loudly, but I will never forget the look of this dog backing away whining, trying to get the smell off with his paw. I did learn an important lesson though, and take showing seriously now. I grew up as a fat kid who saw all-you-can-eat deals as challenges as opposed to promotions, and my parents took me to Sizzler one Sunday for their all-you-can-eat shrimp. Destroyed it as an 8-year-old. An hour later, we are at Good Guys as my dad's checking out TVs, and I get the bubble guts. I tried to hide my squirming, but was in full view of one of those display cameras that managed to put the image of me totally sheeting myself on an entire wall of TVs. For those interested, it felt and looked like a sloppy Joe elemental. Embarrassed, we had to walk to the mall nearby where my parents had to buy me new pants, underwear, shoes, and socks. Yup. So my dad says, "Well, we are here at Mervin's, might as well get some clothes," and he tells me to wait by the fitting rooms while he tries on a couple pairs of pants. And then the bubble guts returned with a vengeance. Panicking, I stared right at the full-length mirror at the far end of the fitting room and watched in horror as I sheet my pants again for the second time in 30 goddamn minutes. This one was the fast traveling, liquid kind, the lightning to the first sheet's thunder. Anyway, dad hears this and says from his fitting room, "What was that?" Ended up having to buy another set of pants, underwear, shoes, and socks. We left immediately after. Now, I laugh every time WW2 is referenced, because my dad refers to those two sheets as fat man and little boy. Good times. Too long. Didn't read. I ruined a Sunday afternoon with my parents by sheeting myself twice in the span of half an hour. I never fuxed with all you can eat anything after that. I was like 9 or 10. I had just started playing GTA 3 and had just watched one of the first cutscenes when you walk into Joey's garage, where some prostitute or we is sitting on his workbench as he's toiling away under a car or something. All the details about the cutscene are very foggy except for the lines. "Come on Joey, when are you going to drill me?" Yeah in a minute baby. I assumed drilling was like Joey's specialty or something, cause he was a handyman and drilling a hole is a handy skill to have. I felt like a real badass playing GTA and went downstairs to tell my dad. I don't know that I felt bad as he was working on something in his tool shed, the handyman he is, and my brain suddenly pieces the two ideas together and I blurt out, "Come on dad. When are you going to drill me?" To which he kinda just looks at me and says, what?" I'm pretty sure he followed with, "You shouldn't say things that you don't know the meaning of." But I think I've kind of repressed it since, cause I'm not sure if he actually said the last part or if I just tacked it on as a manufactured memory to help cope with the crushing embarrassment I felt when I discovered Born a few months later. I'm thankful that this fairly tame naivety is probably one of my most embarrassing childhood memories. Okay, so when I was 6, both my parents had jobs that prevented them from picking me up at the end of the school day, and so I spent 3 p.m. till 6 p.m. every weekday in a daycare. It was generally okay, but I used to get annoyed that I had to stay longer than all my friends, and that my friends could never come to mine after school. We used to play this game where one kid stood in the middle and winked at people to kill them. I forget the exact rules, but it is not important. In this game a girl who evidently wanted to be my friend, but I hated because she was a Nike girl and beat me at literally everything, had been killing me all afternoon as per. This had been winding me up for a while, and that day in school she had beat me in a spelling test, the one thing I was usually better at. The 4th time she did it, bear in mind this is in front of the entire daycare, I stood up in a jealous rage and pulled her pants down in front of the whole group. Obviously everyone gasped as I screamed at her not to wink at me again. The poor girl was mortified and burst into tears. If I remember correctly I made it worse by refusing to apologize. I have no idea how I justified my behavior. I was a massive dickhead at 6 apparently. Not only did I got kicked out of after school care, putting a huge financial burden on my parents, who then had to pay more for an out of school one, but the girl was teased mercilessly at school for the next year. Everyone thought my behavior was somehow funny. It makes me want to curl up in a ball just thinking about it. I remember the worst bit being the look of sadness on my mum's face when she was called in. She must have known how much my actions were going to cost them. Too long. Didn't read. I was the worst kid ever. Publicly embarrassed a girl by pulling her pants down simply because she was better than me and caused massive financial hardship on my parents. When I was in 5th grade I went on a overpass school field trip at a campsite. It was a really big place, so there were about 8 other classes of kids also on the trip, so like 130 to 150 kids also, and all of their homeroom teachers to chaperone. They had us all sit in a room so they could go over the rules and events for the weekend. It's about a half-hour long speech given by one of the male teachers. I never had for anything during his speech about the weekend. I got bored and started looking around the room. That's when I noticed one of the female teachers from another homeroom had a new hairstyle I thought looked good. So after the speech was over, the male teacher, whose name I'll never remember, asked if there was any questions or anything. I raised my hand and said I liked that other teacher's new hairstyle. He just kinda stared at me blankly and said, "Yeah, okay." That's when every other kid sitting cross-legged in this giant room turned and stared at me with this "WTF did you just say?" expression. Then the teacher whose hair I said looked nice started bawling and ran out of the room. I was just confused as hell. 2 of the other female teachers gave me the meanest look I still remember till this day and ran out after her. Then the guy quickly ended the assembly outside the kids in my class told me that that teacher whose hair I commented on had cancer, and she had just lost all her hair. Me being a stupid 5th grader had no idea. In all honesty, now as a 32-year-old, those teachers and kids were a bunch of pricks for acting like that. I mean, there's no way I could have known about this woman's cancer, but because all the adults in the room acted the way they did, the kids in the room acted how they did, based on what they saw. I'm not saying the teacher with the cancer was at fault, of course, but I was really just trying to give her an honest compliment, and I had no clue. Either way, I still think about this a lot even as an adult. It's one of the most embarrassing moments of my life when I was a kid. Welp, I jacked off in church and pissed myself at school. I'm probably on a list. I was about 12 at the time and had just discovered jerking off. I worked the church sound booth in the back corner, but the back row could see into it pretty easily across the aisle. I was in the sound booth during a Sunday afternoon service and started to get a boner. I mean, the back row was watching the sermon, and I had a table to shield my pecker from the pastor. What could go wrong? Father forgive me. I cranked it then and there with holy vigor. I kept a straight face for the pastor, but an old woman in the back row noticed the lashes I was dealing out. A normal kid would have zipped and aborted. Turns out I'm not a normal kid, because I power played this lady with full eye contact. We know it was good for you too, old sinner. She poked the old gent sitting next to her, but I stared them both down as I cranked my knob. I sprinkled my holy water in a minute or two, and the three of us looked back to the sermon. They must have told the pastor and my parents. How the hell did that conversation go? Because I was forced to move my chair to the center of the sound booth and away from the table the next week. Then I was given the talk about a week later. I still long for the good old days when I could yank it in church without facing jail time. Edit. When I pissed myself, I was about 5 at a safety town where we learned about street safety, fire safety, etc. It was my first time using a public restroom on my own. I was homeschooled and I had to take a piss. I walked up to the urinal and let her fly, but the urinal was too high and my dick was stuck to my stomach. Hot summer day, I guess. I pissed all over myself as a cop walked by me in shock to a stall. He walked pretty fast though to avoid the spray. I'll let it all out. So now I'm trying in vain to dry a smelly soaked shirt with the hand dryers, but I had to cut it short to catch the bus. I lined up with the other kids by the main entrance, but fortunately I had a few minutes to rub my soaking shirt on the kid in front of me. Looking back, why in the hell wasn't I stopped for vigorously rubbing my soaked shirt on the poor soul in front of me? I dried off fairly well onto SpongeBob and made it home without telling my mom. Mission accomplished. I had started my period for the first time in my 6th grade science class. I didn't know what I felt. I just knew my pants were wet. I was an extremely shy kid and never raised my hand to use the restroom. I'd always wait until I got home. Luckily I was wearing black jeans, so you couldn't see anything. The problem was, the chairs were yellow. I stand up to turn a paper in and see the mess I had made. I was in complete fear. I wasn't about to go up to the front of my class, only to tell my teacher I bled all over the seat. I accidentally spilled my water bottle onto my seat and got the whole class's attention. No big deal. Nobody noticed the water was tinted red since the lights were off as we were watching a video on the projector. I grabbed some paper towels to clean up my mess. To my surprise, nobody had said anything yet. My seat was now an orangish yellow color, but I didn't think anyone would really notice. I ran to the bathroom after class, cleaned myself up, and cried a whole lot, and put about 30 layers of toilet paper on my underwear like a pad. I thought I had gotten away with my crime. About 2 classes later, the phone rings in my health class and I'm to report to the nurse. Turns out the kid who sat in my seat in the next period immediately noticed something was wrong and got my teacher over. The nurse was a total beach and straight up told me I was gross for doing that and shoulder came to her like I would with that attitude, right? I have to wear these huge granny panties and a pad for the first time ever. The worst part is, she made me change into some ugly as donated grey shorts in the middle of winter. Once I return to class, everybody notices I'm wearing different pants and immediately starting asking questions. I didn't know what to say, and I blushed so hard. Luckily my health teacher was a godsend and got the other kids to stop pestering me. I only know this next part because my BFF was in the following class. The entire class goes batshit crazy and everybody stands up and checks their chairs. One girl even started crying. Then, one stupid motherfucker just happens to know I sit there in the previous class. All the clues are coming together now. The water spill, my changed pants, my seat. I got made fun of the rest of the year. Luckily it was forgotten about by the following year. I've never shared this story with anyone, besides my mom who found out from the school, not even my boyfriend of 2 years. It's just so embarrassing yet diabolical I just try to shove it away in my mind. Too long, didn't read, started my period at school, bled over a yellow chair, tried to clean up blood with water, left stain, was later called to nurse and changed pants, teased rest of year. In high school some people from the local HBCU came to give a presentation on racial prejudice. Most of the students at my school were black, and I'm white. I was excited about the presentation because I wanted to be a better person, and also because it got us all out of English class for a day. The presenters did a little activity where they held up laminated pictures of different people and asked us to tell them if we thought a certain thing about them. For example, they would hold up a picture of an old white man and ask, what profession do you think this man has? And of course students would say stuff like politician or CEO. Then they would hold up a picture of a young black woman and ask a similar question and get responses like mother or teacher. It was all very telling and interesting and depressing, but I have very bad eyesight. Even with glasses on I was sat pretty far back in the room and the laminated paper had kind of a glare on it. It was pretty difficult to see most of the pictures. Nevertheless I was trying to participate. So the presenter holds up a picture of a white guy with blonde dreads and asks, would you hire this man for a business job? I thought white guys with dreads are culture vultures. Still do. So I gave a cocky and loud, no way. Cue 30 or 40 black teenagers gasping and looking at me, angry and betrayed. My white classmate sitting in front of me turned around with her eyes bugged out, mortified. The man in the picture wasn't white, he was very much black. I had just proudly announced to my entire class that I wouldn't hire a black guy for a professional job. Stayed after the presentation to apologize profusely to the HBCU students and explain that I couldn't see properly. They thought it was pretty funny, but I'm sure everyone who was in my grade still remembers that one time Super Dreamcast 64 was openly super racist. I imagine I probably hurt a lot of black students' feelings by saying that too. I wish I could go back in time and strangle myself before it happened. My hometown has a strong Norwegian heritage. In elementary school, we would learn Norwegian dancing and perform it at the retirement home. In 3rd grade, I borrowed my friend's, who is actually Norwegian, authentic, and very expensive, Norwegian dress for the performance. I had to pee. I was really shy, and I always had a problem informing an adult that I had to pee, and generally held it. I held it way too long. Mid-dance, I just started going. Warm liquid running down my leg. I remember vividly looking down at the puddle, being mortified, and casually stepping to the side so that nobody would connect it with me. Neither my friend or her mom ever said anything about the dress. My mom didn't know about it until I told her over a decade later, which surprised me because I was sure that my friend's mom knew, and she and my mom are best friends and share everything. Also wet the bed at a friend's house during a sleepover of about 10 kids on the brand new leather couch. Again, woke up and casually left the scene of the crime. I remember her parents being confused about the wet spot and me feeling absolutely awful. But again, never caught. I still feel awful about both instances. I was the good child that never lied because I would certainly go to hell, but at the same time I was too embarrassed to admit it and already socially awkward as it was and wanted to keep my friends. Side note, not sure why I was so convinced. So when I was like 10 years old, I really liked this girl named Lily. So my mom kept pushing me to do something about this crush, and she finally convinced me. My first mistake. It was on Valentine's Day and she basically sat me down and talked me into it with stuff like, do you want to spend the rest of your life not knowing what would happen? What's the worst that could happen? Etc. So I set up a plan. I'll buy her a rose, give it to her during lunch, and smile when she says yes. Obviously that didn't work out. So I go through with the first step. Every year my school lets you buy roses and either have someone deliver it to them during class, or you can deliver it yourself. And of course, me being the positive child me, I chose to deliver it. Now the cafeteria people at my school obviously had an extra chromosome in how things are done. Even if you're a table away, you have to walk a circle around the cafeteria to reach that table. I tell my friends what I'm about to do. They set up a chair, and by the time I reach that table it's in an uproar. Real palms sweaty, mom spaghetti moment. I'm about to hand the flower to her, and she already looks disgusted and mortified. A good sign for what's in store. I try and give her the flower, but she won't. Her hands are in a frickin' don't shoot position. As any rational 10-year-old would do anything, I go back to my table crying with my head down. It took one of the aborted lunch ladies to make me get up again and give the flower to her. That's not even the worst part. For the next few months I completely avoid her, and the few times I do, I make the cringiest statements to her and her friends about how I don't even care anymore because you're a jerk. Just the absolute definition of a train wreck. I even wanted to look away, but couldn't. I mean, it's not as bad anymore. We talk a little bit in homeroom. I've gotten less cringy and pathetic, and she's forgave me. This really wasn't her fault. P.S. Sorry for the bad writing. I just needed to let the internet know about this. I didn't really do anything except tell my parents what happened at school. 4th grade 1994. I was all excited like butters and said we got fingerprinted at the school by cops because someone stole $40 out of the teacher's purse. They asked a few other questions. I don't remember really what, because I didn't think it was a big deal. My parents were silent as hell, but I just finished my dinner, play some video games, and go to bed. Didn't think anything of it. They sent a letter to the school asking about how this whole thing happened and why a classroom of school children were fingerprinted by the police. The response, in mail back in those days, said maybe we didn't know how things go in the South worked. We moved from Midstadt, New York for my dad to work down here. School principal also said they burned the fingerprints. Nobody was caught. It was 4th grade. I don't know what my parents sent back, or if they sent another letter, but the teacher singled me out a week later. Close to the door to the classroom into the empty hallway. She bawled her eyes out telling me how sorry she was. That it was probably a bad idea what she did. Just really I was uncomfortable as hell as a 9-year-old. I didn't even know my parents sent a letter. I just said, it's okay. I felt bad, but then all the kids assumed I took her money because she singled me out. The reality is that my parents stood up for me, made her rethink her decision, and I freaking love that. Did no one else say they got fingerprinted by the police in school that day? Drove my little Tonka Jeep up to some chick that was broken down and proceeded to have more game in my little 5-year-old life than I've ever had in the other 20. Tiny little red Jeep rolls up. Tiny little me proceeds to go, hey baby, do you need help with that? I fix this thing all the time. I know tons about cars. Little me says this while pulling the plastic toy engine out from the engine bay, obviously trying to show my immense knowledge and badassery. Obviously this girl is wowed by my superior display of manliness. It's the only reason I didn't get rejected. Oh, okay, maybe you can help me out then, she said as she watched a 5-year-old kid start messing around in her engine bay. In reality I didn't know a damn thing. The only car I ever worked on was plastic and battery powered. I really just sat there and acted like I was doing stuff and then told her alright, it should be all fixed. It was at this moment I knew I won her over. She asked to see my parents. Only now do I realize how much game little me had. I was a player, a heartbreaker, and a mechanic. Too long. Didn't read 5-year-old kid spends half an hour hitting on a chick that was probably 15 to 20 years older than he was. 5-year-old me was more successful with women than the other 2 decades of my life. This happened in 1982, when I was 12, and I still remember it vividly. I was a pretty awkward 12-year-old girl. My best friend at the time was not. I was small, super skinny, and very flat-chested, while my friend was pretty and very curvy, at least by 6th grade standards. So, I get this brilliant idea to stuff my bra. I walked into my 6th grade class the next day, full of confidence, along with a half dozen Kleenex stuffed in my training bra. I did this for a week. It felt great. I could tell that other kids were noticing my shape, and I was thrilled. Until that Friday, when we were lined up to go to a school assembly. Behind me was this girl Michelle. Michelle was mean. Michelle was popular, and strangely, Michelle looked about 22 when we were in 6th grade. So we are standing in line waiting for our teacher to escort us down to the cafeteria/gym/auditorium for said assembly, when Michelle starts violently sneezing. Fake sneezing. Michelle proceed, might add, grabbing the attention of every single kid in the class. Wow, I must have a cold. I need a tissue. Wait, I know, and turns, looks at me with this evil little smile I still remember today, and reaches into my shirt, down into my bra, and pulls out a wad of tissue practically equivalent to one of those travel packs of Kleenex. She holds it up, laughing her ass off in front of 32 other 6th graders. I was beyond mortified. Oh man, I've got a good one that I still will never live down. It was probably when I was in elementary school and my dad took me and his best friend to go to Denny's for food. When we got there, I immediately got the coloring kids menu and went to town while thinking of chocolate chip pancakes, while my dad and his buddy talked about video games and other stuff. After a bit we ordered what we wanted, and I got super excited for my pancakes, especially since I knew they were gonna be fresh and have strawberries in the shape of a smiley face. In hindsight, I really should not have been that excited for just pancakes, but ADHD me was stoked. Eventually, the polite waitress brings out our food in this giant plate, relative to kid me, of pancakes, and I was so excited that I couldn't contain myself anymore. Now, as a kid, I watched a lot of shows I probably shouldn't have, learned words I didn't know the meaning of, and played violent video games to mold my brain into a swirling mix of Jesus Christ why. This moment was no different. I stared at my plate as the waitress gave it to me and yelled as loud as I could, "I'm a lesbian." Now, hearing a little kid scream that in any restaurant will cause shock to most people, but being a little boy that didn't know what that meant, I guess made it a little worse. Everyone looked over, I mean everyone, and kept swapping gazes between my dad and I. Finally, after the initial 5 seconds of shock settled, the waitress bent down and asked me, "Honey, do you know what that means?" "Nope," I said, and I happily started to munch down on pancakes while my dad covers his face in his trademarked face hold of shame. In the end she explains what a lesbian is when two ladies like each other like your mom and dad do, and kiss, and my kid brain decides to say oh, gross, and continue eating. Everyone laughed it off when the initial shock settled, but my dad still tells that story now, and it's probably 15 years later. I was getting dressed for my soccer game. I'm short, so my shirt basically hid my pants when I wore them. I put my shirt on first, look at my legs, and think that I'm ready. I get in the car, but I still don't notice the cold under my shirt. I get to the game, and I still haven't noticed. We start warming up and running around, and nobody else notices either. Then we get into positions. The whistle blows. I notice. What do? I couldn't just run off, tell my mom, and go home, because that would be weird. So I played, but trying not to run too hard that people could see under my shirt. The whistle was blown again, and it was the end of the first half. The second half starts. Somewhere in the middle of the half, I trip. I roll over, showing underneath my shirt. It was fast, but I think someone from the other team saw me because of their facial expression. Sometime after that I was subbed off. Then, for some reason my coach wanted to sub me with the goalie. But he wanted me to be fast, so he told me to turn my shirt inside out. Keep in mind this is only U13. Whoops. I convinced him not to after about 30 seconds, and got the goalie jumper off my teammate. Goalie wasn't exactly fun either. I tried not to dive too hard as to expose my underpants. The whistle is blown again. It's over. I get in the car, very self-conscious. I get home, and my pants are still lying on my bed. Too long. Didn't read forget to put pants on for soccer game. Nobody notices, but had a hard time trying to keep it secret. My mom loves this story. I was 4 and in kindergarten. My brother was 5 and in first grade. My class had show and tell one day and we all brought in the typical stuff, toys and such, except this one girl who brought in a sonogram to show. She was very excited and happy about her new sibling. Anyways, when she's done my teacher asks us, do you know where babies come from? And I raise my hand. And I'm pretty sure she was expecting a euphemism, you know? The stork brings it, or it's a gift from God, or your parents buy it from the hospital. What she got was your mommy and daddy have to get up in the bed and wiggle. Which, honestly, I don't know where I learned that, but for a 4-year-old it was pretty accurate. Of course, everyone goes apeshit. I was totally oblivious, of course, in the way only children can be. I remember getting sent to the principal's office and having no idea why I was there. I knew what I said. I didn't know what was wrong with it. Then my mom got there, and I had no idea why she was there. My mom says she got a frantic call from the school and left work thinking my brother got in a fight again. But it was me, sitting there in my Oshkosh gosh overalls without a care in the world. They told her what happened, and I remember there being a lot of back and forth between her and the principal about me being in the room for the conversation, but I tuned out. It was grown folks talk and boring. Anyways, my mom decided to just take me home for the day, and while she was at it, she decided to take my brother too, so she didn't have to come back later. So he gets up to the office, and, having spent way more time there than I did, was immediately attuned to everyone being in a tizzy. He asked me what I did, and I said I don't know. Mrs. X asked where babies come from, and I said mommy and daddy have to get up in the bed and wiggle, and everybody got upset. My brother, ladies and gentlemen, stood in the middle of the office and said, you dummy, they don't wiggle, they slide. We got a week off from school. Bonus, my kindergarten teacher was the family preacher's wife. I definitely did a lot of stuff that makes me cringe when I was younger, even recently, but in 7th grade I did something I'll never forget. I had a huge crush on this girl, and one of my best friends liked her best friend. We decided to send letters to them at the same time and he wrote both of them. I decided I wanted to write my own, and to quote it vicariously. I want to be with you, but I'm too shy now to ask you out, someday we will date. Basically, I don't know how I thought this was even remotely acceptable and not weird. I guess I was just counting on the fact that she wouldn't find out it was me. But she did, because one of my friends told a few guys, and I guess somehow the word spread. A few months later her brother asked me if I was the guy who sent her sister a love letter. Yep, that's the worst possible thing that could have happened. The worst part is that I did it again, about a year later. My friend helped me write a poem for her at lunch, and I was pissing myself all of band class, figuratively, until my friend gave the letter to her. The letter wasn't totally cringe-worthy, but I wish I would have had the balls to give it to her myself. At the end of the hour, the teacher calls me into her office, and I was confused as frick. I was certain the girl I liked had told on me. I freaked out and left and was super down for the rest of the day. In first hour, I told my friends how I sent someone a letter and the girl had told on me really loudly and emphasized on how sad I was. I go to band to find out I actually had just forgotten to turn in my permission slip. I was away at camp the summer before 6th grade. It was super cool because it was one of the first times I had been away from home and allowed to stay in a cabin with other kids without an adult. So obviously we were really jazzed about getting opportunities to fraternize. Everybody was looking for a camp girlfriend/boyfriend, etc. I had been socially successful enough to make friends with the cool guys in my cabin, which I felt would definitely raise my chances. And each night of the camp they had a social/dance type thing, so we were sure we had it made. Well, the first night of the social they played a game where one of the counselors would go around the dance, shine a flashlight on someone random, and they had to bust a move right then and there. The first few kids did amazing stuff. One kid did a split, another kid did this cool twirl thing, one kid could break dance, cheering and applause after each. Then I randomly get selected, and my brain starts racing. What should I do? So I do this weird spastic freak out motion flailing all my appendages, like I'm being electrocuted. I can see the visible cringe on the counselor's face, and it's dead silent afterwards. One of the cool guys from my group puts his arm around me and just says in my ear, "Don't ever do anything like that again." So, yeah. That moment followed me for the rest of the week of camp, and I was known as that guy. Other fun stories from camp: one of the kids in our group sprayed soda all over the vending machine, and they had to evaluate the damage. The kid was very distraught afterwards when they told him they were going to have to charge his parents $3,000. Another kid in my cabin was like a serial killer in the making. He had brought this suction cup dart gun with him, and the first day he ripped all the suction cups off and would shoot at you with just the plastic dart bodies. It hurt. The same kid tackled me at one point and held a fire extinguisher nozzle in my face and was screaming about how he was going to freeze my brain. Luckily a counselor was nearby and came and pulled him off of me. When I was in the 4th grade, we had a Halloween party at my school where we were allowed to bring our costumes to change into and eat snacks in our homeroom. I specifically remember that year that I had a pink and grey barbarian costume. When the principal announced over the intercom that we could change into our costumes, I immediately asked to go to the restroom to do so. Now, some background info. There was a teacher at the school that was notoriously evil. She was hateful, rude, and extremely intimidating. She almost sent me to the principal's office once for telling a kid which page we were on. She thought I was just talking in class. She was also infamous for sending kids to the office for leaving the curly fringes on their paper from tearing them out of spiral notebooks. When I went to change, the girls' restroom was, as usual, a mess. It was an elementary school, after all. Every single stool had wet toilet paper stuck to the floor and was overall just gross. No way I was gonna change in one of those. So, I had to make a decision. The result was me deciding to just change in the corner of the restroom facing the wall. My logic here was we're all just girls in the bathroom, so if someone walks in, it's okay. Not even 20 seconds later, the infamous teacher walks right in the restroom. I turn to look at her, costume half on. Part of my soul withered away that day and has never returned. She just said something along the lines of, "Oh, maybe you might want to change in the stall next time." Ashamed, I just replied, "Okay." My dad was living in a little bungalow out in the backyard of my best friend's mum's house. We were 10 or 11 and weren't yet friends, and he was having a birthday party that I wasn't invited to, but I was over at my dad's place and a curious young lad that wanted to pass the time. So I pretended I was a spy, snuck down and hid behind the car in the carport, and pretended to shoot the guests as they arrived. It made sense to my young mind that they were kids I didn't know, and therefore enemies in my little spy scenario. About 15 minutes into it, this really pretty girl walks up the driveway and spots me as I shoot her with my finger guns. I drop behind the car, heart racing. I think to myself, she didn't see me, did she? Is my cover blown? I should probably report to home base before my situation gets any worse. As I'm running over what my next move is, now that this pretty girl blew my cover, unbeknownst to me, she's made her way around to my position behind the car, and as I get up to retreat back to my dad's bungalow, aka home base, I realize she's standing right there with an expression on her face that I describe to this day as a "what the frick are you doing?" look, staring at me squatting behind my dad's white Mitsubishi. Manner holding my hands up Charlie's Angels style. I'm not proud of what happened next, by the way. After what was most likely a second or two, maximum, but what seemed like 4 hours of soul-crushing embarrassment, I outstretched my arms and shot her again with my finger guns, as if that would put her down for sure, and I could go back to sniping the guests as they arrived. I think she thought I was mentally retarded or something. I sincerely do not blame her, as her face just cringed, and she walked back around to where the party was being held in the nearby garage. I don't think she ever told Mitch, my best friend, that was throwing the party, as I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have been friends at all if that were the case. Good times. In 4th grade, I really wanted to throw a pool party on the last day of school for everyone in my class. There was a girl I really liked, and I had this perfect adolescent ambition of impressing her with the perfect pool party. I asked my parents, and they said yes. Only thing was, there were a few kids in my class that I didn't have a problem with exactly, but I was afraid if they showed up no one would come. They were of the smellier, larger variety. I couldn't work my head around it. My desperate 9-year-old mind was convinced that if they came to the party, no one else would. It was a toxic and really a very pathetic complex when I look back at it. So what I did is in the invitation I wrote at the very bottom, don't worry, X, Y, and Z won't be invited or something to that effect. But then I got so embarrassed and felt so bad that I blacked out the line with a Sharpie. So then I handed out the invitations, and I was kinda bummed BC not that many people could make it, but the girl I liked could, so that was good. But then my friend told me that his mom said he couldn't go because you could see the message at the bottom through the Sharpie, and she couldn't believe something like that was allowed to leave the house. I was so devastated. I felt so embarrassed that the invitations I had handed out had such a hurtful message on them. I felt so bad. I never apologized to the kids, and I had to cancel the party on the day of anyway because of rain. But whenever I think back on this memory I still get really sad and embarrassed. Phil, Brian, if you're out there, sorry guys. L. Catholic youth camp. I can't remember how old I was, but it was old enough for me to know that what happened was completely fricked up. It was the last morning. I was jarred awake by a feeling in my gut, not unlike the feeling of being stabbed. I was a complete introvert and I knew I had to use the bathroom, but I didn't want to wake my counselor up to tell him I was going to use the latrine up the hill from our cabin. However, the pain became too unbearable, so I shook him awake violently and told him I was going to the latrine as I was leaving the cabin. I ran up the hill as fast as I could and tore the door open. As I closed it and pulled down my pants, my butthole couldn't hold it anymore. With my pants halfway past my ass crack, I unloaded and exploded fesses, half being redirected back into my underwear and half exploding onto the wall behind me. I must have spent an hour in there wondering what the frick I was going to do. When I decided, I wiped the mess of sheet from my pants and left the remainder on the wall. As I open the door, I see the line of kids waiting to use the toilet I had violently destroyed. What did I say? Yeah, that was like that when I got here. Embarrassed as hell, I ran back to the cabin to change, but realized that I couldn't for fear of everyone seeing my sheet-filled pants. I wore those dirty sheet pants all day, including the 3-hour drive home with my stepmom. Worst day ever. Too long. Didn't read. I had explosive diarrhea into my pants and all over a latrine during summer camp. Was at a house party when I was about 18 and a few of us decided to get a taxi uptown to a club instead. On the way out of the house, these two kids about 15 were shouting at us and asking for alcohol. Me being drunk and thinking I'm hard decides to shout abuse at them and tell them to frick off as we got in the taxi. Was in the club a few hours before deciding to head back to the house party. Got out the taxi and I decide to call it a night and head home. Stick my headphones in, and I'm so drunk at this point I'm just singing out loud, really loud and really badly, whilst walking through the public park. I notice a recycling bin is on fire behind one of the skate park ramps, so I wander over to take a look. It's quite relaxing looking at fire when you're away with it, so I'm still singing away and watching this bin burn when all of a sudden two kids come from round the front of the ramp. It's those kids I shouted abuse at. They heard me singing and realized who I was. I point blank lied and said I don't know who they are and that I wasn't at any house party. I'm still super drunk, so that lie didn't go down well. One of them punches me right in the jaw. I'm too drunk to feel it, but at that point I just sprinted away and hoped they weren't chasing me. Got home and in bed. Wake up the next morning with my jaw in agony. Remember everything that happened and super cringe every time I think about it. Too long. Didn't read. I was really drunk and shouted abuse at some kids. They find me later on in the night singing to myself, so decided to punch me in the face before I run all the way home. I hate myself. In the 8th grade, my teacher realized she left her purse in her car and asked me to get it for her. I went to a small K-12 private school, so this wasn't weird. She said she drove the silver Honda. I was, not good with recognizing cars. I'm just not a car person. The only reason I know what cars my husband drives is because I memorize license plates. I'm about as good at recognizing cars as I'm at recognizing faces. Hint, not very. Also important to note is the fact that this was at a time when power locks weren't super common yet. Also a key part of this story, the high school kids were having their morning break. So here goes 13-year-old me, waltzing my way out of the gate, and for some reason, I totally ignore the silver car parked closest to the school gate. Instead, I walk all the way across to the lone silver car parked under the lone tree in B parking lot, and try to unlock the car. No luck. I jiggle the key in the lock a few more times. Nope. No dice. And I'm sure the eyes of all those high schoolers are on me at this very moment, while my awkward barely teenaged hands try to jam that key into that lock like a horny teenage boy getting it in for the first time. I'm befuddled. I do the walk of shame back to my classroom, explain my predicament to my teacher, who at this point is probably wondering how someone could frick up unlocking a car that badly, and enlist my sort of friend to help me with my problem. And off we embark back to the parking lot. The high school kids are still outside. Why is their break so long? 15 minutes is all it takes, right? I shove the key into the lock again. See? I tell my comrade. Jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. Still, nothing. My classmate shakes her head and shrugs in confusion. And then, after what feels like an eternity, but, in reality, was probably only about a minute, I hear loud and clear from across the parking lot, "Wrong car, dummy." And so I did a second walk of shame back to the gate, where I see the silver car that I had completely disregarded for who knows what freaking reason and decide, why the hell not? Let's put it in and give it a go. And that's the story of how a 17-year-old very clearly witnessed me trying to break into her car on a school morning during her break time for a purse that didn't even belong to her. Gonna get buried, but whatever. Definitely have 5 to 6 instances like those mentioned already, but I definitely feel better knowing that my wacky ways aren't all too weird. Top embarrassing moment. I'm in the 5th grade, and we'd had a busy weekend full of sports for me and my sister, family outings the huge extended family we had, and parties thrown by our friends. I was so damn tired. Cue the longest week in my young life, and finally it's Friday. We get the treat of eating lunch in our classroom before some of us have a big test in our math class. I'm so tired, so anxious that I begin sobbing hysterically. I cannot freaking stop. I just bawl outright for like 45 minutes. No one is sitting next to me. The dudes in my class that were my closest friends are giving me a wide berth. I pound my lunch, make some comment to the popular girls in class, snickering and whispering that it's an anxiety attack and I'm not a wussy. My 9/10y/O brain says it was negative about me. Probably not. Ask to go to the nurse. She lets me lay down for 10 to 15 minutes, calls my dad. He talks me back to class. The walk back to class was full of dread, and I almost started bawling again out of embarrassment. However, 3 deep breaths later, I returned to class a new man. It was as if they all talked about it and said, "When Pandastran 35 gets back, be freaking nice, yeah sheets." So what, he's a blubbering freaking mess. Be nice, goddammit. Kudos to that 5th grade class in S. Austin. Good bunch of folks. So I was calling one of my ex-friends when her boyfriend answered. I'm a guy. He told me to leave his girl alone and never to talk to her again. Me being a sarcastic idiot said, "You want to fight about it? How about KFC?" He knew exactly where the KFC I was talking about was and how long it would take him to get there. "I'll be there in 10 minutes," he said. I just replied with a sarcastic "Yeah, okay." I had never met this guy in my life, mind you, but right out of the gate I knew he was crazy. I decided to hang out with another friend instead, to left my house to get gas first. To let you guys know, I was never serious about meeting this guy and was just joking with him. But 10 minutes later I'm filling up with gas at Circle K, which is at least 2 miles from the nearest KFC, getting in my car ready to leave for home, when I hear a tap at the window. I look over to see a tall black guy holding nunchucks in one hand and a fist in the other. He tells with an angry face to get out of the car and never talk to so and so again. As I'm looking around me to asses, what's happening? I see a huge Mexican dude holding back some girl trying to talk some sense into nunchucks, and like 3 other people in a car parked behind mine. What the frick? Amazingly, I wasn't completely in shock from this guy and his posse appearing out of nowhere with nunchucks, and knowing what I look like / drive. I told him no, she can do whatever she pleases, and so can I with my best tough guy impression. All that produced was a disgusted look on his face as he started to walk back to his car, probably to get a katana, I don't know. That's when I hightailed it out there lol. The most embarrassing part out of the whole thing was telling him to meet me at KFC as a joke and not knowing he was black, and him actually showing up to KFC, not finding me there because it was just a sarcastic quip, and then somehow he ends up at a Circle K like 2 miles away where I just happened to be. Dude was watching way too much anime bringing his nunchucks to fight me. Probably would worked really well at beating my ass with them. Though. Oh, where to start? In 5th grade, I was so disruptive to the class that the teacher decided to move my desk up to the front of the room next to her desk. Big mistake. That was essentially putting me on center stage, and I took it as a challenge to make everyone laugh when her back was turned. One time, I was wearing a long sleeve knit shirt, stretchy, and I would pull one arm out of the sleeve inside the shirt and stick it down into the other sleeve so my both hands were sticking out of one sleeve. It was quite awkward looking. Then, I'd wave both hands to the class. The first few times, there were only quiet snickers, and I was able to do this a couple more times and quickly pull it out before she knew what was happening. This of course made it even funnier to the class, and then last time, they could no longer contain it and all started laughing, and I so was caught. She saw me and said, "Oh, I suppose you think this is funny?" Now, at this tender age, the concept of a rhetorical question was not something I was really able to grasp. Naturally, I said, "Sure," which of course got the crowd, class, laughing again. So far, this was working out well for me. As it happens, at that very moment, a bunch of kids were being led down the hall past our door and she said, "Then perhaps you'd like to perform for the whole school?" As I said before, I didn't know about rhetorical questions, so I eagerly agreed. Meanwhile, the rest of the class was laughing more and more. I was too stupid to be embarrassed, so she told me to go over to the door and perform my little trick for everyone. My mom always told me to do what the teacher told me to do, so I had to oblige. I pulled out one arm from my shirt, stuck it down the other sleeve, and, standing at the open door in front of about 20 other kids, waved at them with 2 hands inside the one sleeve, while the other dangled loosely at my side as they passed by our door. The rest of the kids in my class were unable to contain themselves, and the kids walking down the hall started laughing as I just kept on waving. In my mind, this was all 100% sanctioned by my teacher. I was having a great time, and I was making everybody laugh. It never occurred to me that I was going to get in trouble later. Naturally, this is quite embarrassing when I think about it as an adult. Side note, my sister-in-law ended up becoming a teacher at that same school about 15 years later, and when the other teachers heard her last name, they said, "There was a kid named Monk that went here and used to do some of the weirdest stuff." She embarrassingly said, "Yeah, I married his older brother." It's nice to know that my legacy had lived on.